At the same time, there's plenty of news from overseas, including one headline from U.S. News which says victory or failure in Afghanistan, 2018 will be the deciding year. That's our focus for the full Washington Journal on this Monday. Afghanistan, specifically this question: should the U.S. stay or leave that country? If you think the U.S. should stay in Afghanistan, call 202-748-8000. If you think they should leave, 202-748-8001. We have a separate line just for Afghanistan veterans. We look forward to hearing your stories and your opinion on the situation there. Your number is 202-748-8002. But if not by phone, you can weigh in at social media. C-SPAN WJ is our Twitter handle. You can also post a comment at our Facebook page. It's facebook.com/C-SPAN. Well, to start us all off on this Monday morning on Afghanistan is Pamela Constable, who is Afghanistan and Pakistan Bureau Chief for the Washington Post. She is in Islamabad, Pakistan this morning. And Pamela, start us off by reminding us how long the U.S. has been in Afghanistan now, and what's the current situation there?
Well, it's been 16 years since the Taliban was overthrown and the UN brought in a new government, which officially took office in 2002. The fighting was actually a bit of a lull for several years, but it picked up again starting around 2005, 2006. So I would say we're really talking about 11 years of intense conflict against the Taliban insurgency. It's had its ups and downs. There have been a lot of difficulties getting the Afghan defense forces in shape to defend the country. The United States has spent billions of dollars on military aid, on military troops being there, as well as aiding the government to simply support itself over these many years. And the Taliban are still hanging in there and are still causing mayhem across the country. So now we've got this new policy with a new president, new generals, and really trying to ramp things up in a way that had not been done in a while. And we don't know how it's going to go, but it's going to be a long haul, I think, and it's going to be a tough battle. And I don't think any American official here or in Washington thinks otherwise. This is not an easy fight, and it's not over.
How many troops exactly, U.S. troops, are in Afghanistan at this point? What are their current roles, and what will be their biggest single challenge, if there is one, moving forward?
I couldn't say how many there are today because it is changing. It's a fluid situation. It's supposed to go up, I believe, to about 13,000 by the time they're through with this new surge. So it's probably, on the way there, maybe 8 or 9 by now, maybe more. And they're focusing on several things. They're particularly going to be focusing on recruiting and training and expanding the size of the Afghan Special Operations Forces, who are working a lot on counterterrorism, which means against the Islamic State and specifically, and also training them to work to fight against the Taliban. And another thing they're doing is trying to expand and professionalize the Afghan Air Force. The United States has provided many aircraft. They're in the process of bringing in more than 150 Black Hawk helicopters to train pilots, Afghan pilots, to fly them in combat field, and a number of other things. One focus is that by adding more troops, they're going to be able to advise Afghan troops at a more basic level, in the field, so to speak. Still going to be mostly advising and training rather than engaged in direct combat, but working much more closely at a lower level with Afghan forces themselves. And then another priority, which doesn't directly involve the troops but is a top priority for both the Afghan and the American governments, is to improve the leadership of the Afghan military, particularly fighting corruption and poor management at the top of the Afghan defense forces. So it's a very full plate. And again, it remains to be seen how well it's going to go. But certainly the U.S. and Afghanistan are very much on the same chart at this point, and they've worked out this joint roadmap for the next several years, which they're working very closely together on. So that's a very good point. In the last administration of President Karzai, there was much less coordination and not the good rapport that the two governments have now. So that's a plus.
So explain the stability of the government itself in Afghanistan. How stable is it currently, in your view?
Well, it's stable in the sense that I think it's not probably going to collapse tomorrow or the next day. But it's been really racked by internal divisions. It's got a lot of very serious problems. And, as you may recall, when the government took office, it wasn't as a result of a clean and clear election. It was a result of diplomatic negotiations, essentially forced by the United States, which ended in the two top presidential candidates having to share power. That has not gone well. They have not gotten along. There have been ethnic divisions as well as policy divisions. They've patched things up recently, but the divisions within the government and the sort of political atmosphere surrounding the government is still quite fluid. There's tension. There's a lot of pressure. There's a lot of political machinations going on right now. Everybody's in a pre-election mode, wondering what's going to happen. The current government essentially is no longer legitimate because it outlived its mandate. Its mandate as a temporary joint government ended after 2 years. The parliament has also not been legitimate for the last 2 years because it, too, has outlived its mandate. So basically you have both the executive and the legislative branches of government not enjoying constitutional or legal legitimacy, and there's a great deal of public lack of confidence and disillusionment in that situation. So again, it's not going to collapse tomorrow, but it really needs to do a lot more to get on track towards any sort of smooth running of things and transition to another government in the future.
We appreciate this update and this setup on Afghanistan. We should point out as well that you're in Pakistan, and there is this headline to a piece that you wrote, Pamela Constable. It says anti-government protests in Pakistan enter a second day, but most are peaceful. What's been happening in Pakistan, and why is it significant?
Well, what's happened over the past several days here in Islamabad is that a religious group had launched some protests weeks ago against some things they did not like and the changes in a political law. And we can go into those later. But basically, it was a protest that started several weeks ago and was essentially allowed to keep growing and growing and growing until several thousand protesters ended up blocking the major highway between the capital, Islamabad, and its neighboring very, very large to work until it became a night. These protesters just becoming stronger, and the government kept doing anything about it, and forced by the Supreme Court to do something. So they sent in riot police and others. That was very, very early Saturday morning. What happened was demonstrators fought back and fought very hard, and this really took everyone aback.
Pamela Constable of the Washington Post's Afghanistan and Pakistan bureau chief. We did get the point there in the Pakistan story. We're losing connection, but just want to say thank you. Not sure if you can still hear us, but thanks for the update this morning. We are spending the full Washington Journal talking about Afghanistan today. We're taking your phone calls and going through portions of a hearing with the Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction. His name is John Sopko, who was at a hearing recently, so we'll show you pieces of that hearing, but we'll talk with Mr. Sopko in person on the set starting at 9 o'clock Eastern Time. Adam is our first call for this segment. Clayton, North Carolina, an Afghan veteran. Good morning, Adam.
Good morning. Good morning. I just, in terms of, so Afghanistan is a quite complicated situation, and there are many moving parts to understand. The Daikundi province, the Pashtuns, which are more in the south, more in the Kandahar region, and then how the provinces really feud back and forth with each other. The American infiltration into Afghanistan has done many things to try to secure what they say is a freedom concept, but really what it's done is it's just emboldened the groups that are there under, a religious context to band together. And the Commando Candex, what your caller was talking about previously here, which is the Special Forces, that unit disassembles constantly because it is simply just not held together well. And there's quite often they're infiltrated by people who turn, as we've heard of, green on green and Afghan folks turning on each other. So anyway, I'll summarize this and just say that if they take a lesson from the Brits who went through there, and I think it was General Elphinstone who said, the less the Afghan people see of us, the less they hate us, because they've been in war constantly since Genghis Khan and so on. But that is the truth. We have no business there. We need to leave that country, and the things that are the tantamount successes that we've had in Afghanistan are not the things that are reported, because war is being perpetuated. So as a veteran myself, and as somebody who has experienced on, the boots on the ground in Afghanistan, I will tell you now, remember this: the less they see of us, the less they hate us.
All right. That was Adam from Clayton, North Carolina, an Afghanistan veteran. We welcome veterans calling in this morning. Joe has been waiting on the line from Silver Spring, Maryland, just outside D.C. Joe, you think the U.S. should stay in Afghanistan? Tell us why.
I do think we should stay in Afghanistan. I just want to make three very, very quick points.
Okay.
The first is a place that's been under war for 40 some odd years, since 1979, has been racked internally by war and division. And, of course, as the previous caller mentioned, war before that is a place where it's going to take a long time for them to sort out a very, very tangled mess for them to be able to organize their affairs in a way that isn't so complicated, isn't so messy, and doesn't breed instability all over the place. And the second thing, I'll cut out the other point, is the second point I'd like to make, is a place will collapse the same way Iraq collapsed. In other words, if they are left on their own, to their own devices, the place will fall apart. And then we will either be faced with the choice, and we'll have to accept the choice of either having to go back in and to deal with the issue, or just to let the region fend for itself and then deal with the extremism that comes out of a collapse, of a vacuum like that altogether. I don't think anyone wants to deal with that. And unfortunately, the most that can possibly be produced is a positive negative, which is to essentially keep them from collapsing. I think we need to reevaluate what's attemptable there, but at the same time, that ultimately is the choice on the other end of pulling out, in my opinion.
Joe, thank you for calling from Silver Spring. Another viewer who thinks the U.S. should stay in Afghanistan is John. He's calling from East Setauket, New York. Good morning to you, John.
Hi, how you doing, man?
Doing well.
I just wanted to say, for starters, we promised the Afghanis when we went in there back in 2001 that in exchange for their information and for being on our side, we wouldn't leave. That was number one. We promised our allies, hey, we're not going to leave you here. We're not going to leave you and let the Taliban come back and rule your lives, et cetera, et cetera. That's first and foremost. Secondarily, and yet even more importantly, better off to play whack-a-mole over there than in our own backyard. That is going to be a place where they're going to gather to project their hate at America, and may as well be there. Kill them there, not here. If we have to kill them here, we'll have to kill them here, but better there than here. Play whack-a-mole overseas, thousands of miles away from us, than in our own backyard. That's all I got to say. Thank you for listening. I'm gone.
Words of John there. Plenty of other calls coming in. We'll get to them in a moment. Here are some comments at our Facebook page. Garland writes that you have to look at the geopolitical ramifications of a premature withdrawal of military forces in the country. This is a much more complicated issue than you could ever imagine. Doug writes this morning, we should first publicly and thoroughly listen carefully to the best advice from our best military leaders. It's an extremely complex, convoluted conflict, and if we should decide to leave it, leave, then it must be in the right manner and not a snap judgment. There have been too many lives taken and wounded and national treasure expended to ever have this be a knee-jerk political or hastily arrived at decision. Some of the details, the facts and figures about the Afghanistan war. It started back on October 7, 2001. This according to the Inspector General, the Department of Defense. Brown University is adding to this study. It's the longest war in U.S. history, they say. Reconstruction cost to the U.S. since 2001, $714 billion. U.S. dead, 2,350. U.S. wounded, 20,000 people. U.S. News and World Report has this headline, as we talked about at the top of the program: Victory or failure in Afghanistan, 2018 will be the deciding year. The subhead says the Trump administration says it has everything it needs to succeed there, but also has a limited time to prove that it's right. This story coming out of Brussels and says the war in Afghanistan will be decided in 2018 when a new military-heavy U.S. administration in Washington will prove whether its plan will be enough to overcome entrenched battlefield obstacles and convince skeptics that it is capable of putting an end to America's longest conflict. U.S. News and World Report. We have Grant from St. Louis. Grant, what do you think about all this?
Well, I think we should stay, mostly because it's not a war you can win immediately. You have to, like right now, it's sort of, we're in the phase after most of the fighting where we're training troops for stability, which obviously takes a long time. And then there's also the fact that a lot of the tribes don't like each other there. I know people who have served there. It's going to take a long time to get it done. It's like they say, Afghanistan is an easy country to get into a war there. It's darn near impossible to get out.
Anthony calling now from Miller Place, New York. Anthony, you think the U.S. should leave? Tell us why.
Yes, Paul, and I thank you for this opportunity. I would just draw your attention. I would draw your attention to an article in the New York Times by Barbara Crosette on May 20th, 2001, just 4 months after 9/11, and the headline reads: "Taliban's ban on opium on poppy a success at USAID say. The first American narcotics to go to Afghanistan under Taliban rule had concluded that the movement's ban on opium poppy cultivation appears to have wiped out the world's largest crop in less than 1 year," officials said. And if you just read further into that article, what it's basically implying empirically is that the invasion was all about the freeing up of the opium product. So it's as though this war was started. And look at the streets of our cities. I mean, they cured our disease in this country, the opium epidemic, inside of 1 year. And look where we are now. Ever since we got in there, we're basically protecting the production of opium. We're spreading it throughout the world. I mean, 75% of the world's opium crop comes from Afghanistan. And, here we are 4 months later, right after 9/11. What a great excuse. And then not to mention the military-industrial complex. I mean, what Donald Trump just sold a ton of weapons to Saudi Arabia, and they're the ones that attacked us on 9/11. Afghanistan had nothing to do with it. Paul, so I would just ask you to please pull up this article and go over it and discuss it with your watchers and listeners. Thank you.
We can go ahead and find it, Anthony, later. There's a related piece to what Anthony is talking about. It's in The Hill. It just moved several days ago. It says that the U.S. has begun bombing Taliban opium plants in Afghanistan. The military has begun bombing these production plants there as part of a new strategy targeting Taliban revenue. This from a top general. Using F-22 attack planes and B-52s, the military says it dropped bombs on labs where the insurgents turn poppies into heroin, as well as storage facilities where they keep their final product, where they stockpile their money, and their command and control. This from General John Nicholson, commander of the NATO-led Operation Resolute Support in Afghanistan. Nicholson did say the Taliban makes an estimated $200 million a year producing opium, with 400 to 500 drug labs in the country, and the recent strikes took out 10 labs, according to Nicholson. We have Mark on the line now from Lynn, Massachusetts. Mark thinks the U.S. should leave Afghanistan. Mark, tell us why.
Well, I'm looking at a whole worldwide perspective of how the world has been divided by the imperial period, and the lines of division between countries run through ethnic areas. I've just returned from Tanzania, and many of these problems that we see around the world are due to the fact that these lines were drawn in Berlin and Paris and London and affect the whole world for decades and centuries now after they were drawn. I don't know how to unravel them, but I think that is the area that needs to be addressed more than dealing with the governments as they stand.
Thank you for calling, Mark. Douglas is calling now from Silver Spring, Maryland. Douglas thinks the U.S. should leave. Douglas, tell us your view.
We should leave because we need to learn from history and follow its lessons. And the last call and the call from Adam were very good. Adam quoted a British general, the less they see of us, the less they hate us. Look at Vietnam. We could have learned from that. What did the Vietnamese call the Vietnam War? Colloquially, the American War, because before that they were fighting the French, before that the Japanese, before that the Chinese. And it never works with the outside invaders because the people will fight forever. The same happened in Afghanistan. They will fight us forever. They fought the Russians forever until they gave up. They fought the Brits forever. Alexander the Great gave up. It doesn't work. You can't go in and tell people how to organize their country. And the last call was great because he pointed out the borders make no sense. Iraq is a country of, Sunnis, Shiites, a few Christians, and Kurds. It makes no sense. That's truly what we need to work on, not invading and telling them how they need to organize their country.
We will be spending the full 3-hour Washington Journal on this Monday about Afghanistan, whether the U.S. should stay or leave. Remind you of the phone numbers. If you think the U.S. should stay, call 202-748-8000. If you think the U.S. should leave, it's 8001. And 202-748-8002 is a separate third line just for Afghanistan veterans. We've heard from one. Look forward to hearing from others. Michael writes that Twitter, the tribal nature of Afghanistan makes Western-style government tenuous at best. And Kevin writes, if you can't get it done in 16 years, it's not happening. Stop the nation building. We covered a hearing recently with the special investigator for Afghanistan reconstruction. His exact title is the special inspector, the SIGAR, they call it, the special investigator for Iraq reconstruction. His name is John Sopko. He'll be on this program a bit later. We have a series of clips from a recent hearing that he did on Capitol Hill. And here's just one opening round that he had with Chairman Ron DeSantis about his recent trips to Afghanistan and what he thought the situation is there. Here's a look.
You got to meet, I think, as you alluded to, a lot of the folks on the ground. Just the average American were to come up to you and say, what is going on in Afghanistan? What's the elevator speech you'd give them?
It's a stalemate. And the big question is it a stalemate going down or is it a stalemate going up? And I don't have a good answer for that, sir.
SIGAR's Security Assistance Lessons Learned report is very extensive. What would you say the bottom line of that report is?
The bottom line is the U.S. government was ill-prepared to conduct a security sector mission. They didn't understand the size and scope of what they were facing. Our normal security sector assistance is to a developed country. We're helping, let's say, the Turks with a new weapon system. We're helping the Koreans with a new personnel system. This was designing and building an entire military and entire police force. The other problem is we were totally misaligned in our capabilities with their needs, disorganized, did not fully understand and utilize NATO for the things that they could provide. And we have detailed a number of problems with giving too complicated systems, having military officers in the U.S. trying to teach police, having Air Force pilots teaching police, having people who know nothing about personnel systems, teaching ministries on how to develop personnel systems. So that was the big problem that we found. Those are the findings and lessons of the report.
That was John Sopko, the Special Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction, who will be on this program later. There's also this headline at NBC News. Still a stalemate. A top commander in Afghanistan says The General, John Nicholson, who we spoke of earlier, has told NBC News recently that the war here remains in a stalemate, but that President Trump's new strategy has reversed a decline in the U.S. position. We are still in a stalemate, he said. We are only 90 days into this new policy, but with the U.S. forces that will be arriving, with the new authority that we've been given, put the pressure on external enablers with the fact that we are condition-based and not time-based. We've set all the conditions to win. The article points out as well that Nicholson also called out Russia and Pakistan specifically for enabling the Taliban and explained his decision to detonate that massive ordnance air blast bomb that was known colloquially as the mother of all bombs in April. He also said he has the confidence of the president. That from NBC News recently. Jim on the line now from Riverdale, Georgia. Jim, what do you think the U.S. should do in Afghanistan?
Well, I think, thank you for taking my call, first of all. Sure. I think we should leave Afghanistan. I'm a 65-year-old Vietnam War veteran, and it concerns me that as a nation we didn't learn any lessons from the Vietnam conflict. For instance, once the United States places a troop on foreign soil, we never know how many troops are going to have to follow him. And I was listening to the comments Ms. Pamela Constable was making, and it brings back memories of the corruption of the United States trying to prop up a corrupt government in Vietnam, which is what she was saying about Afghanistan. And to me, I'm unsure about what we're trying to accomplish in Afghanistan. What does success in Afghanistan really look like? What are we trying to accomplish?
How would you answer that question, Jim? What do you think success looks like?
I'm not sure. That's my question. We're over there, and I'm not sure what our final goal is. We're like your previous callers were saying, we've been over there 16 years, and off and on for 16 years. But the clear-cut goal of what our end goal is, I'm not sure, and I'm sure a lot of American people feel the same way. What are we trying to accomplish?
Okay, Jim. Marie is calling from Greenville, Mississippi now. Marie, you're on the line for those who think the U.S. should leave. Tell us why, Marie.
I think they should leave basically because the money that's being spent to fund this assignments that are being done by private military. I remember a statement Gorbachev made, one of those leaders made a long time ago. He said the American people are the most brainwashed people in the world. We believe whatever our government tells us. Because my question is, when has America ever cared about any brown-skinned people enough to stay in their country over almost 20 years under the cover of helping them set up their government and helping their people be more protected from those around them, when we have black people dying every day and shot down by, police here in our own country. And not all, but some of those same military people come back in March with the white supremacists in this country. And another thing, and you were saying, the only reason the United States will ever stay in any country of that magnitude if it's something in that country of value to them. And you read it in that article a little while ago, those opioid fields. That's what they're over there for. These opioids that hit this country is not hit this country by accident. And that's what they're over there for, and that's what they're harvesting, and that's what they're trying to fight those people for their own opioids. Whatever reason they have them over there and whatever reason they do with them, those opioids didn't end up in this country by accident. Thank you.
Okay. From Marie to Ron, and Ron is calling from Oak Grove, Kentucky now. Ron is an Afghanistan war veteran. Ron, first tell us about your service, your experience, and what you think the situation is there right now, in your view.
Am I on the air right now?
You are, Ron.
Okay. I'm 20 years. I'm retired from the Army. Okay. I joined in 1982, and then I went to Desert Storm, Somalia, and then I was in Afghanistan right after 9/11. The Army right now is broke. Basically, you got people going over there doing war crimes. I protected all my people, and nobody is really trained anymore. They don't know. They don't have any ethics classes. They shoot anybody, and it's basically a mess over there. And they should pull out one thing. We're a white Anglo Saxon Christian country, and we can't occupy a Muslim country. That just doesn't work.
Anything else, Ron?
Well, it's just, I mean, it's generational now.
Mm-hmm.
I was actually trained. People are not trained now. They go to basic training and then end up going to a war. You can't do that. I was in the Army 8 years before I went to my first conflict, okay? If you go to basic training and don't even shoot your weapon and then go to a war, you're committing murder on your own people. You understand what I'm saying? You got soldiers, and they're just stupid. I'm right by Fort Campbell, Kentucky. I'm telling you, I talk to these young guys all the time. They're brave. It's not that. They're untrained, and they don't know what they're doing.
Okay, voice there of Ron from Oak Grove, Kentucky. Plenty more time for your calls. We have another 2.5 hours on Afghanistan, including a guest a little bit later at 9 o'clock Eastern, John Sopko, the Special Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction. Here are some more facts and figures via Newsweek. The U.S. military, they write, is set to triple the amount of bombs it has dropped in Afghanistan this year under the Trump administration compared with last year, according to new figures. So far this year, the U.S. Air Force has dropped 3,554 bombs there, according to this recent story, since the Taliban, as of October 31st, they write. This is almost 3 times the 1,337 it dropped in 2016, and almost 4 times the figure from 2015, which was 947. Newsweek writes the increase is consistent with the new strategy that President Trump announced in August that would see the presence of U.S. soldiers expanded. Story there on the number of bombs being dropped. Here is John Sopko at that recent hearing talking to Democratic Representative Val Demings at Florida on recent classification of information about Afghanistan. Here's their exchange.
You said in the quarterly report to Congress from Cigar Notes that the military's retroactive classification of important information about the Afghan defense national defense and security forces will, quote, hinder your work. I know my colleague, Mr. Lynch, spoke somewhat about the classification system, the retroactive classification system. Do you believe, and I think you answered in the affirmative of this, but do you believe that the American public should continue to have access to at least basic data on the Afghan national security forces?
Yes, I do, since they're paying for it.
Earlier this week, the New York Times reported that Navy Captain Tom Breschbach defended the decision to classify the information, saying that it was done at the Afghan government's request. Do you think that it is an appropriate justification for DOD to classify previously unclassified information based on a request from the Afghan government? Why or why not?
I do not, because I believe in transparency, and I think the loss of transparency is bad not only for us, but it's also bad for the Afghan people. Truth, the Bible says that truth will set you free. I think somebody else said, but it'll be uncomfortable in the beginning. And that's what I told President Ghani. Your people want to know the truth. And ironically, the stuff that was classified, the Taliban know this. They know who was killed. They know all about that. The Afghans know about it. The U.S. military knows about it. The only people who won't know are the people who are paying for it. That's your constituent. That's every one of you who pays taxes. And I think the American taxpayer has a right to know how their money is being spent and whether it is succeeding or not. If you classify this, the only people who won't know what's going on in Afghanistan are the people who are paying for it.
Has DOD provided you with any other justification for classifying metrics that were previously unclassified? If so, what was it?
The only justification we want was that the Afghans didn't want it released. The second justification was a reinterpretation of some policy on classification, but they never gave us a copy of the policy. I think the other telling thing is they will not identify who classified the material.
We'll talk to Mr. Sopko about that a little bit later. Here's a related headline in Business Insider. The Defense Department is making it harder to tell what's happening inside Afghanistan. They write that after 16 years and $120 billion spent on the reconstruction since the invasion, the Afghan National Defense and Security Forces are alarmingly unprepared to take on the resurgent Taliban that slowly clawed back territory since NATO combat operations ended there in 2014. But they ask exactly how unprepared. We may never really know, writes Business Insider. For only the second time since the beginning of the reconstruction effort in 2002, U.S. forces, Afghanistan has classified and restricted once public information regarding the state of Afghanistan security forces, including casualties, personnel strength, attrition, capability assessments, and operational readiness of equipment, all key measures of the country's security woes. You can read at businessinsider.com. Jonathan is on the line now from Marietta, Georgia. John, you think the U.S. should stay in Afghanistan. Tell us why.
Well, I think they should stay because it only fits the part. If most of our military is being used by Israel, because all this is about whoever controls the Middle East controls the world. So by sitting in, that's why it's not so much about color, it's about territory. That's the center of the earth. So whoever controls the Middle East controls the earth. And our military is being used by Israel to go around the whole earth to fit the part. And
okay.
That's it.
Thank you for calling. We have William's on the line now from here in Washington, D.C. William, what do you think? Should the U.S. stay or leave Afghanistan?
The U.S. should leave Afghanistan. In fact, they never should have even gone to Afghanistan. The whole idea about terrorist safe haven in a failed state is a complete myth. The Taliban would have handed over bin Laden if they were capable of doing so, had we negotiated or paid them. We didn't have to have this $1 trillion war. And if I say terrorist training camp, what visual image comes to one's mind? Guys with jihad garb, AK-47s on their back, scurrying across monkey bars. We've all seen footage like that on the news. I don't know where it came from. Probably like the CIA had one clip like that and they show it over and over again. But what do monkey bars have to do with hijacking airplanes? The flight simulators, U.S. driver's licenses, those were the tools that the terrorists used to perpetrate 9/11. None of those are available in Afghanistan. We should want them to be in Afghanistan because that's one country we can bomb whenever we want. It's just ridiculous at this point, and it's a complete waste of money. There's a great book I would recommend about the war in Afghanistan. It's called Fool's Errand, Time to End the War in Afghanistan by Scott Horton. It's available on Amazon, and I think that you should have Scott Horton interviewed on C-SPAN at some point to talk about his book because he is an expert on the subject.
Thanks for calling. To the line for those who think the U.S. should stay in Afghanistan. David's in North Carolina now. It's Joel. Good morning, Joel.
Yes, good morning. I think we should stay in Afghanistan because we have not done the primary source of their funding. We have to eliminate the opium crops in Afghanistan, solve the problem of the war where they get their money, and two, solve the opioid problem in the United States at the same time.
Anything else, Joel?
Well, I think it's just patently obvious that the United States doesn't want to treat the real problem. I've spoken to you guys before when you had the commander on about the war, and he says it's not our purview to take care of the opium crop.
Thank you for calling. And there's Jay. Jay's been waiting from Arlington, Virginia. Jay thinks the U.S. should leave. Jay, explain your thinking.
Good morning, and good morning, C-SPAN listeners. And I just want to thank you for the opportunity, first of all, for giving us this platform. My point is just what a refreshing thing it is to hear the Inspector General just lay it out in plain English, none of the nonsense, and just look, it was messed up. It was messed up from the get-go. There was supposed to be, the same nonsense as there was in Iraq, where we're going to have their hearts and minds, they're going to greet us as winners and everything like that. And even when something like that was a possibility, you look at it as, all the issues that they had at the prisons and the treatment of people, the disrespect of these people's culture, and then at the same time you think that you're going to carpet bomb a village and then you're going to get all of these people to back you up and say, oh, yeah, sure, we're down with your cause now. It just makes no sense. The only thing that I'm seeing as a result of all this is, they're going to try to wait it out, because the only substantial study that came out of Afghanistan, unfortunately, was when they did the big survey for the billions and billions and billions of minerals and things like that they're apparently sitting on that will apparently never get excavated because it's just a hostile war zone, and they're just trying to clean that up so they can try to get in there. But the whole thing about the OPM, about all of this nonsense, it just makes absolutely no sense. And the only thing that I see coming out of this is more weapon sales, more civilians dying, more of our young men and women just going out there and coming back, unfortunately scarred, with nobody here to take care of them when they get back. So, there's an answer for this somewhere. It's really, really complicated. It's a lot, past my pay grade, I'll be honest with you, but this is just absolutely ridiculous and just nonsense.
Jay, thank you. Thank you for calling, Jay. Got some other callers want to get in here. We're doing this for the full 3-hour Washington Journal today, and later we'll talk to John Sopko, the Special Inspector General. Here is the front cover of the latest report that they put out on October 30th of this year, the quarterly report that CIGAR makes to the United States Congress. Congress is the one that put this position together. And if you type SOPKO, S-O-P-K-O, on our website, cspan.org, at our database there, our video library, he will pop up and you'll see his latest hearing that we covered. And we have a small piece from that hearing, again for you. This is Congressman Walter Jones now, talking to John Sopko and getting his thoughts on the need for what he calls a new debate in Afghanistan.
Because I will tell you truthfully, there are at least 90 members of the House, both parties, that were not here in 2001. I was here in 2001. And when I hear this waste, fraud, and abuse consistently for 16 years, I'm on the Armed Services Committee, it distresses me as a taxpayer. I have the Marine base Camp Lejeune in my district. I've taught the Marines active duty and retirees who have been to Afghanistan 5, 6, and 7 times. And they say nothing will ever change. That has nothing to do with the work that you and your staff do. Y'all are the truth tellers. The problem is that Congress continues to pass bills to waste money over there, and we can't even get a debate. So my last point, very quickly, if you are here 10 years from now, and I won't be here 10 years from now, would you be willing to tell the members of Congress, the American people who are now financially broke as a nation, have done about all they can do in Afghanistan? Are you, Mr.
Congressman, as you well know, and we've had this conversation, I don't do policy, I do process. But I do promise you, the first day I'm out of this job, because it's not my job to talk policy, I'm happy to publicly tell you what I really think about our mission in Afghanistan. But until then, it's not my job to do that, and I support this committee, the chairman, the ranking member, for holding hearings. I'm a history buff, and there's a famous quote by President Lincoln: "Give the people the facts, and the country will be free." And that is what our job is. We give you the facts, and you as the policymakers decide whatever you do. I think Congressman Welch was very accurate on that. Whatever side you are in this issue, I just state the facts. I'm like the umpire. We have a ball game that was last night. I'm calling strikes and outs and whatever. Some people may not like me, but I'm still supporting the game. And that's what my job is, and your job is to then take those facts and handle them appropriately.
And more of your calls on Afghanistan now. Should the U.S. stay or leave? Robert from Tuscaloosa, Alabama, says the U.S. should leave. Robert, tell us why.
Sure. So, first of all, good morning to you, and thank you for allowing me to get on. We should have had another category up there that never should have been. You can't go back to that. But the rich people with guns, making those guns, those weapons, those $1 million missiles got to be exploded someplace. But it's a shame. I'm 81 years old, and I'm afraid not for myself, but for my grandchildren, because this is the place where the blood is going to run. Right here in the Western Hemisphere that was invaded, sir, some years ago by European subgroups. In other words, and the lady, I heard the best news this morning, the best answer this morning from an African-American lady, seemed to be about 40 or 50 years old. She was exactly right. There has never been now, we're not talking about all Europeans that are here. There are some good ones, but most of them here are for themselves, and all this stuff's going to come back here. It has begun to come back already, sir. My maternal grandfather was in the Army. My uncle was, my mother's baby brother was in the Army, and my baby brother was in Vietnam. And when they came back here, they had worse treatment than they were treating the soldiers over there. And so this country is the one that messed up. And this is the one you better get straight, because the blood and the blaze is going to be here worse than anything I believe that we have seen anywhere in any of those wars that the United States has perpetrated. And I know we have some good people, but they have to follow the rich people, never send their children over there. They stay here and enjoy the revenues that were collected from over there for here. Thank you, sir, for allowing me to make this observation.
On to Jesse now, Woodbridge, Virginia. Jesse, what do you think?
Good morning.
Good morning.
I do believe that we need to pull out of Afghanistan.
How come?
I served in the military from 1987 to 2010, and I've had a global perspective from being deployed overseas and in the region. I believe that we need to pull out because we've done our part. We've collaborated with the nation of Afghanistan. We've tried to encourage other nations to get involved. But right now, I believe that there's not enough equity. And basically, our focus has been in so many directions. We need to really, bring our ideas back at home, re-strategize, and say to ourselves, what else do we think we need to do? What else can we do better? But from the standpoint from within our own shores, I think other nations need to get involved. I think other nations should take the lead. I understand the strategic value of operationally when we're trying to respond to threats, globally or even in that region. However, we have to pull back now. We have different priorities within our own borders, different priorities in terms of our values here in the United States. So I think we need to pull out of Afghanistan. I think we have enough to focus on, and I think we need to focus on keeping our country more secure here within our own borders, focus on our own values, before we try to go back into another nation to try and shape theirs.
All right, Jesse, thanks for calling. Sean thinks the U.S. should stay in Afghanistan. Sean is in Staten Island. Good morning to you.
Good morning. Yeah, I believe we should stay basically because, the Afghan forces are not ready to take over. They've made a ton of progress, which I truly appreciate, but leaving now, it will only allow the Taliban to take over and to kill innocent civilians over there. And another thing is, although, and I appreciate the veteran who spoke about this matter and how we should leave, the mission has changed. Ever since the previous president had announced that we're pulling troops out, we have seen an increase in ISIS activity and bombing. Now, I know ISIS is diminishing and going down, but the mission has changed. And I don't believe that the Afghans are ready to take over. I mean, NATO troops in Afghan have helped rebuild and protect their society, which is great. But leaving the mission and leaving Afghanistan would be a huge mess, especially since there are still Taliban all around Afghanistan. If we leave, they'll just be able to kill more innocent people, and things will become even more unstable than ever before. Leaving the job incomplete would be one of the biggest disasters the American government has already done. The U.S. went in there initially, which I don't agree with. We're already there. We have to finish our job before leaving.
Thanks for calling. Plenty of other news out there as Congress comes in for what will be at least a 3-week session. You can watch the House here on C-SPAN, the Senate over on C-SPAN 2. Lots of activity coming, and here's a headline in the Hill. President Trump touts a big week for tax cuts. That's in the headline as Senate GOP nears a critical vote. They show the first family coming back from Florida over the weekend. Back in D.C., big week, says the president, for tax cuts and many other things of great importance. This was from a tweet. Senate Republicans will hopefully come through for all of us, was part of the tweet there. That's at thehill.com. Lots of other headlines. Washington Post, urgent agenda awaits on Hill. They write, hope for a deal before a government shutdown. Lawmakers' to-do list includes taxes, DACA, that's the immigration issue, and more. They remind us that government funding expires on December 8th. That's in the Washington Post. Wall Street Journal, Congress prepares for year-end sprint. Lawmakers rush deals on taxes and spending, they write, as sexual harassment allegations reverberate. They remind us that the Senate could actually vote this week on tax legislation. There's also the controversy that erupted over the past few days on the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. Lead story here, Washington Times. Trump and Cordray fight over the CFPB. Chief goes to court. The CFPB will begin work today with two people who are claiming to be chief of the Wall Street Policing Agency, is what is shaping up to be the latest battle between President Trump and the anti-Trump resistance. Mr. Trump named OMB Director Mick Mulvaney on Friday to the acting director of the Bureau while keeping his OMB job. And by late Sunday night, matters had spread to the courts. They write here in the Times that the president was moving forward to counter Richard Cordray, the outgoing CFPB director, with a decidedly anti-Trump bent, who on Friday afternoon announced a deputy director, Leandra English. Mr. Cordray then sped up his retirement to Friday night, which he said made Ms. English the acting director of the agency before Mr. Mulvaney could set foot in the door. And this story and others goes on to point out that this will wind up probably in the courts. Over the weekend on some of the Sunday talk shows, we have Dick Durbin, the senator from Illinois, Lindsey Graham, senator from South Carolina, both on the CNN program, were asked about this issue. Here's a look.
So you can turn to Dodd and Frank, the co-sponsors of that legislation, and I read the provision. It says that when the director steps aside, the deputy director shall be in charge of the agency. Not may, shall be in charge. And so now there's an effort by Mick Mulvaney and the Attorney General to really push him into this position so that he can take away their power. Remember, this was the agency that fined Wells Fargo $100 million for defrauding the people who were saving there and creating phony accounts. It's a watchdog agency. Wall Street hates it like the devil hates holy water, and they're trying to put an end to it with Mr. Mulvaney stepping into Cordray's spot. But the statute is specific, it's clear, and it says that the deputy shall take over.
Senator Graham, finally, who do you think is in charge of the Consumer Protection Agency?
I think the president's on good ground here to appoint somebody under the vacancy statute. And in terms of the agency, it's the most out of control, unaccountable federal agency in Washington. Really no oversight at all. They can get into everybody's business. I don't think they add much at all to consumer protection. They sure add a lot to increasing costs for mid-sized banks throughout the country that had nothing to do with the financial collapse. So I hope it's Mick Mulvaney, and I hope he'll ride herd on these folks.
Pretty safe to assume we'll hear a lot more this week on the CFPB position and who actually leads it and what might be happening next on all of that. Again, Congress in this week for a 3-week pre-Christmas rush. Lots of legislation coming, and we could see that tax bill on the Senate floor as early as tomorrow. But back to Afghanistan now. Should the U.S. stay or leave? Jacqueline, thank you. You've been very patient from Flint, Michigan. Thank you for calling.
You're welcome. I believe they should leave.
How come?
Because they did what they had to do. They took out their target, Osama bin Laden.
And you think that was the only mission they had there?
Yes, they did.
What do you think
they
about?
They shouldn't be there in the first place. They just took out their target, Osama bin Laden. They shouldn't had been over to Saudi Arabia as well. So that's about it. Thank you.
Jacqueline, are you still with us or have you hung up?
No, I'm still here.
Wanted to ask you about what some folks on the opposite side might say, that if the U.S. were to leave, that Afghanistan again could become a haven for terrorists, and that could end up hurting the United States in some way later on. What do you think of that?
Then I believe they should stay in.
Okay. Comments from Jacqueline there. Paul is on the line from Osprey, Florida, who thinks the U.S. should stay. Paul, tell us why.
There's only two reasons after 16 years to stay. The first reason is Al-Qaeda has returned to Afghanistan as ISIS is now there also. ISIS has, I think, about 300 soldiers there, and Al-Qaeda about 500, I think. They're still disruptive. If we left and Afghanistan fell to the Taliban, they would become more disruptive all over the world. It's not a matter of monkey bars. The central planning for 9/11 certainly took place in Afghanistan, and it would continue all over the world. There would be more central planning from Afghanistan if they had a true safe haven under the Taliban. The second reason to stay, which is becoming very much more diminished, is we're attempting to train the Afghan army and police. This is extremely difficult. We probably don't have the best methods to do it, given the cultural differences between the two countries. But the second problem is that the Taliban are extremely good at dissuading the Afghan soldiers from serving. For instance, at the present time, from what I read in the New York Times, the Taliban has actually gone to the families of those people serving in the army and told them they either have to pay an extremely large amount of money that they don't have if the soldier is going to stay, or their houses are going to be destroyed and they may be killed, and then they are following those threats when the soldiers don't quit. So this has led to even more desertions than we had before. So I would say we have to give maybe 2-3 more years to try to train, try to change the ethos of the Afghans, who apparently can't get their army and police especially together. They just can't seem to put the inducements in and get the morale up to speed. If that fails, then maybe we would keep our Air Force there to support the Afghan army, but the Afghan army will probably succumb eventually. And the whole mission then will be a failure because we can't just stay there fighting ISIS if the Afghan army collapses.
All right. Thank you for calling. Paul Longtooth at Twitter writes, why is the U.S. in Afghanistan? 1, follow the money. 2, need for endless war. Reference there to 1984. That was from Longtooth. And another viewer writes, the callers who say we should stay and finish his job had a point in 2005, but not in 2017. Mike is calling now from Jameson, Pennsylvania. Mike, what are your thoughts? Stay or leave?
I say stay, but I say reevaluate the mission, and we need to determine what value we can bring to a country that has been war-torn for thousands of years and has kind of sucked every nation that has been involved there into a quagmire. Right now, we're not bringing any value there. We're only extracting our own energy for nothing. We're just oiling the war machine. And we need to bring, what do the people need? Maybe agriculture. We're the best at providing agriculture in the world. We can bring our technology to actually help those people. We need to bring U.S. interests other than war to that country, and we need to defend what we're bringing there.
Thanks for calling, Mike. Walter, you're on the line from Naples, Florida now, southwest Florida. Go ahead, Walter.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I just really had a question that I wondered if any of the viewers knew what else besides the political objectives and the whole terrorist issue. Is there something of value in their natural resources over there that drives the interest of the world enough to send, I think your quote was 20,000 families have wounded. Earlier in the show, I think the number of wounded may have been 20,000. already American soldiers? And is there a financial, somebody else just recently said follow the money in one of the tweets. And I wonder what is the, if any of the viewers know, the geologic benefit of the natural resources. Are we looking for rare earth metals, or is someone, and why there? Because the terrorist network theory and having a terrorist base, I'm not sure if that's as valid now in the internet world as maybe it was in the 1940s. And that's about it. I just more of a question. What else? If we tried to follow the money, what minerals would we be after over there or other countries?
Okay, thanks for calling, Walter. And Alfred writes at Twitter, one more viewpoint here. It may be expensive to stay, he writes, but think we need as many Mideast strongholds as possible in order to fully extinguish ISIL or ISIS. It is exactly 8 o'clock Eastern Time, and here in Washington, the Congress is coming back into session with a busy workload for the next few weeks. We are spending this Monday edition of the Washington Journal, the whole 3 hours, talking about Afghanistan. So far, we've taken 1 hour of your calls, and we've watched several clips from a hearing featuring John Sopko, who is the Special Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction. He will be along 1 hour from now at 9 o'clock Eastern Time. So in the meantime, we'll continue to look at pieces of that hearing that Mr. Sopko recently was at. Testifying. We will take more of your calls. We'll take more of your comments via social media, and we will bring in lots and lots of other news. But to some of those facts and figures that last caller was mentioning, the Afghanistan war started back on October 7th, 2001, which means it's the longest war now in U.S. history, that according to the CIGAR and to the Department of Defense and Brown University. Reconstruction costs since 2001, $714 billion. U.S. dead, 2,350. U.S. wounded, as that earlier caller mentioned, up to 20,000 now. Also, during his recent visit to Afghanistan, the Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson, was questioned about the current and future length of the U.S. involvement there. Here's what he had to say.
Is there a part of this strategy? As you said, it's conditions-based, but it seems as though that condition means a U.S. military presence far off into the horizon, doesn't it?
Well, the President's made it clear that we're here to stay until we can secure a process of reconciliation and peace. It's not an unlimited commitment. He's also made it clear it's not a blank check commitment. That's why it is a conditions-based commitment. But I think if you consider the current situation in Afghanistan, and we were talking about this a few minutes ago, and you look a few years in the past at what the circumstances were, Afghanistan has come quite a distance already in terms of creating a much more vibrant population, a much more vibrant government, educational systems, a larger economy. And so there are opportunities to strengthen the foundations for a prosperous Afghanistan society. Clearly, we have to continue to fight against the Taliban and against others in order for them to understand they will never win a military victory. And there are, we believe, moderate voices among the Taliban, voices that do not want to continue to fight forever. They don't want their children to fight forever. So we're looking to engage with those voices and have them engage in a reconciliation process leading to a peace process, and their full involvement and participation in the government. There's a place for them in the government if they're ready to come renouncing terrorism, renouncing violence, and being committed to a stable, prosperous Afghanistan.
And this headline, once again, victory or failure in Afghanistan. It says 2018 will be the deciding year. This is from U.S. News. The war will be decided in 2018 when a new military-heavy U.S. administration in Washington will prove whether its plan will be enough to overcome entrenched battlefield obstacles and convince skeptics that it's capable of putting an end to America's longest armed conflict. Armed with a new strategy and renewed support from old allies, the administration now believes it has everything it needs to win the war there. Top military advisors all the way up to Defense Secretary Mattis say they can accomplish what two previous administrations and multiple troop surges could not: the defeat of the Taliban by Western-backed local forces, a negotiated peace, and the establishment of a popularly supported government in Kabul capable of keeping the country from once again becoming a haven to any terrorist group. U.S. News goes on to write that, but they face sharp criticism from politicians and populists at home and from some of America's staunchest allies abroad who believe the U.S. is sinking into a, quote, forever war based around a strategy that is too military-focused and ill-prepared to overturn endemic systems of corruption and patriarchy in Afghanistan. USnews.com. Back to your calls on Afghanistan. Should the U.S. stay or leave? 202-748-8000 if you think the U.S. should stay. If you think the U.S. should leave, that number is 202-748-8001. And we have a separate line just for Afghanistan veterans this morning, 202-748-8002. Welcome everyone to the program. David, Lake Charles, Louisiana. Good morning.
Leave. One word, leave.
How come? David, are you there? David made his point short and sweet, and we have John now from Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Good morning.
Good morning. Have we forgotten Vietnam? Look at all the money we spent fighting a war in somebody else's country that didn't invite us there, didn't want us there, and now that we're trying, after spending all that money, getting all those men shot and killed, we're trading with them. You cannot change the world you cannot change the world from somebody else's country. You have to do it from here. Think of all the money we spent in Vietnam and now in Afghanistan if we put that money into our schools and our children instead.
John, you're calling on the Afghan veterans line, correct?
Well, she asked me if I was a veteran. No, I'm not a veteran of Afghanistan or Vietnam. I'm much older than that, really.
Got it.
It was your number. I used the number I had already in my phone, so I'm sorry about that.
Understood, John. Thank you for calling anyway. Kyle is calling from South Glens Falls, New York, who thinks we should leave Afghanistan, the U.S. Tell us why, Kyle.
I think we ought to leave because we can't bomb our way to peace. I agree with the previous caller about Vietnam. We dropped more bombs in Vietnam than we dropped in World War II. And when you kill family members of people, you are going to never win those people over. Those people are going to be against you till the day they die. Their family will be against you till the day they die. The infrastructure has been totally destroyed. Our own troops don't know who they're fighting. They don't know the good guys from the bad guys in many instances. I've talked to many veterans returning, and that was the most perplexing thing. And a lot of these veterans are National Guardsmen and people like that who are on their 4th, 5th, 6th tours to this country. It's actually kind of disgraceful. 90% of the Afghan people have no idea about 9/11 or anything like that. They're just trying to survive in a very desolate area. We need to help them. We need to realize that bombing is never going to bring us peace.
Kyle from South Glens Falls, New York. Jerry is on the line now. Jerry is in Garner, North Carolina, thinks the U.S. should leave. Jerry, explain your thinking.
Man, there's so many different things on this. Earlier, somebody asked if there was some sort of economic benefit for us to be there. And basically, Afghanistan is rich in trace elements that are for computers and high tech. And we thought, when we went in there, we thought that we would be the great savior and they would give us the rights to the minerals. But the Chinese have it. So where are the Chinese in all this? I mean, if the corporate industrial complex wants a forever war so that they can just make more and more money, and we're paying the brunt of it, or we're bearing the brunt of it, and it makes no sense at all to even be there. When we went in there, they had an economy that was worth $14 billion a year. That was doing $14 billion a year. In a couple months, we're spending that kind of money there now. So it's crazy. There is no reason. There is no sense. And I just don't get it.
Okay, Jerry. Thank you for calling. Plenty more time for your calls, but some more comments via social media at our Facebook page. Several hundred comments coming in on this question of whether the U.S. should stay or leave. And Arthur picks up on the natural resources issue. The U.S. extraction industries have not completely removed the vast quantities of natural resources from Afghanistan, he writes. The military must stay to protect them. Ken writes, everything we are told is a lie. If the U.S. were to leave Afghanistan because it was the overwhelming will of the people, they would only stage another terror attack to justify their actions. Eric writes, fortify those willing to support us, then get the hell out. Continue to provide clandestine support as needed, covertly if required. We will anyway. Rashid on the line now from here in D.C. Good morning, Rashid.
Good morning, sir. My name is basically Bashir. Thank you for allowing me, basically. I really thank those who they served in Afghanistan, U.S. Marine, U.S. Special Forces, civilian contractors, construction, all of them all. I used to work as an interpreter with the U.S. Army and Marine and other NATO forces all over the country. And I would love Americans to be there in Afghanistan, help us a lot, and we are basically grateful of that. And the reason there's a problem, we have to wait more long time because that country was in war for the last 40 years. And all the leaders that we have right now, they're all basically warlords. They are not politicians. They do not have the capacity of leading the country the way it should. So the new generation should pop up, and we should give it a time that the generation should educate themselves. Like we are all, as a young generation, we are trying to study, educate ourselves, and become the new leaders. So U.S. definitely has hard time dealing with those warlords and those who they fought there. They know nothing except fighting. So that's why it's a bit hard, but we do appreciate and we hope U.S. will stay there. And basically, we are expecting the troops should be increased, that the people of Afghanistan can feel a little bit more safe. And that's all what I have.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Rashid on the stay line. To the line for those who think we should leave, the U.S. should leave Afghanistan. Rick is calling now from Cleveland. Good morning. I'm sorry, Edward from Ann Arbor, Michigan. Edward, you're on the leave line. Good morning.
Yes, well, I'm inclined to believe that we've been there plenty long enough, and if we wanted to accomplish anything, we would have done it in that time. I also concerned about the cost of the war, which I don't know. I think it's between $500 billion and $1 trillion, and we have not paid for that. We are way in debt. We haven't paid for either the Iraq war or the Afghanistan war. I'm wondering, did you contact any member of the administration on this Afghanistan issue?
When you say contact, you mean as a guest?
Yes. I mean, I don't know. I'm thinking of what is Mattis' position on this. He's the Secretary of Defense. I don't know if we have an ambassador. Do we even have an ambassador in Afghanistan? Trump has not been naming.
Yeah, so far we just showed a clip with the Secretary of State. We've quoted General Mattis in another piece. What would you like to know or hear from them?
Well, I'm not clear as to the policy and the goals. I mean, is the goal to reconstruct Afghanistan? Is the goal to make it a democracy? What is the goal? What's the policy, basically?
Okay, thank you for calling Edward from Ann Arbor there. Washington Post digs in a little bit further on this week's tax debate in the U.S. Senate. It has this headline: GOP senators talk tax plan changes to win holdouts. Damian Paletta writes that Senate Republicans are seriously considering several last-minute changes now to their tax legislation in an effort to mollify wavering members, said 4 people familiar with the discussions, as GOP leaders seek to keep their members from defecting ahead of crucial votes that we expect this week. The lawmakers attracting the most concerns from leadership in the White House are Senators Ron Johnson of Wisconsin and Steve Daines of Montana, who say the current bill favors corporations over other businesses. Many members, they write in the Post, are demanding changes, and their desires don't all overlap. Together, the requests put Republican leaders in a difficult position as they attempt to accommodate individual holdouts without losing other members or creating a situation in which the bill collapses under the weight of disparate demands. So we'll see how that plays out in the Senate this week. The president's going up to Capitol Hill tomorrow to talk not just about taxes, but the overall agenda, because there are some important fiscal deadlines that are coming. The Washington Times has this headline: Nancy Pelosi defends Conyers, says he's worked to protect women. Michigan Democrat denies workplace sex harassment allegations. They write that the top Democrat in the House defended her colleague, Senator Conyers, on Michigan Sunday against allegations of sex harassment just hours before he decided to step down from his leadership post on the Judiciary Committee while he faces an ethics review. Nancy Pelosi, the former speaker and the minority leader now, was on NBC's Meet the Press. Here's what she had to say.
We are strengthened by due process. Just because someone is accused, and was it one accusation? Is it two? I think there has to be. John Conyers is an icon in our country. He has done a great deal to protect women, Violence Against Women Act, which the right wing is now quoting me as praising him for his work on that, and he did great work on that. But the fact is, as John reviews his case, which he knows, which I don't, I believe he will do. I believe that he will. Excuse me, may I finish my sentence? Sure. That he will do the right thing.
And is the right thing what? Resign?
He will do the right thing in terms of what he knows about his situation, that he's entitled to due process, but women are entitled to due process as well.
Here is the statement from John Conyers, who stepped down as ranking member on Judiciary. Jerry Nadler takes over, by the way. But Congressman Conyers said, after careful consideration and in light of the attention drawn by recent allegations made against me, I have notified the Democratic leader of my request to step aside as ranking member of the Judiciary Committee during the investigation of these matters, he writes. And he also went on to say, I deny these allegations, many of which were raised by documents reportedly paid for by a partisan alt-right blogger. Mr. Conyers says, I very much look forward to vindicating myself and my family before the House Committee on Ethics. I have come to believe that my presence as ranking member on the committee would not serve these efforts while the Ethics Committee investigation is pending. I cannot in good conscience allow these charges to undermine my colleagues in the Democratic caucus and my friends on both sides of the aisle in the Judiciary Committee and in the House of Representatives. The statement from John Conyers there yesterday as he stepped down as ranking member on the Judiciary Committee. Back to calls now on Afghanistan. Rick, Cleveland, you think the U.S. should stay. Tell us why.
Yes, I think they should stay because, well, I'm a Vietnam vet.
Okay.
I was in the Navy, the Army, and Army Reserve. Okay, I think they should stay and find out all the real players, or all the real establishment in the governments and whatever, and come to some kind of terms with this. It's more to this than what we see. Behind the scenes is a whole lot different than being on the news. They need to neutralize this situation, get all these behind-the-scenes players, the ones that's involved in all of this over there, and they need to come to some kind of terms. With that, thank you.
Thanks for calling. Omar. Omar is in Terre Haute, Indiana now. Thinks the U.S. should leave. Omar, tell us your own thinking.
Well, someone earlier stated trillions of dollars have been spent on this war, and just 1% of those, maybe less than 1% of those trillions, every American in this country could have health care, not to mention all the other things that those trillions of dollars could do for this country. At root of this issue, really, we went into Afghanistan to rout out Osama bin Laden and al-Qaeda. As far as I know, al-Qaeda has long since been destroyed in Afghanistan and has been reconstituted in other places. Americans don't want to face it, but really these people, the Taliban, are native Afghanistan people. They're not foreigners. These people are fighting to defend their homeland. They're actually freedom fighters. If they were fighting the Russians or the Chinese, we would call them freedom fighters. But because they're fighting America or American soldiers, they're terrorists. Somebody, and this is my last comment, one of your emails earlier, somebody mentioned that our War Department has a way of bringing the American people around to always supporting all these wars around the world, and that is, frankly, they will instigate terror attacks and stage these kind of things to justify U.S. intervention in all these hot spots around the world. And this is what's been done, really, when you think of ISIS. You know, it's been done with Syria. ISIS now, I hear, is popping up even in Afghanistan and in parts of Africa. These things are just not happening in a vacuum on their own. But again, the bottom line is these people are defending their country, and whether we want to face it or not, they're actually freedom fighters. Thank you.
Thanks for calling. James is on the line now from Glen Burnie, Maryland. James thinks the U.S. should stay. Hi, James. What are your thoughts?
Well, a man will fight for his food. Bottom line, you know, a man will protect his food. It will make the desert, make it flourish, turn it into a food basket. You know, invite the Israelis. Help them grow, crops and help them with the economy. You know, all they keep saying fighting. What are they fighting for? If they're going to help them fight who? Fighting themselves? So trust me, if we really want them to stay, turn the place into a food basket. Help them with agriculture. Bring in the experts. Make the desert green. That's the bottom line. That's the only way to solve this eventually.
Okay, thank you for calling, James. American One writes at Twitter, "We can't train anyone. We've never been successful at training any other society, and we can barely train our own society." That's from American One. Here's another exchange from the recent hearing that John Sopko, the Special Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction, had on the House side. He spoke here with Georgia Republican Jody Hice on the successes of training the Afghans in the U.S. in preparation for the security role they will serve in Afghanistan. Here's a look.
You alluded to a few moments ago that it's just kind of the way it is, but is there a better way to train these individuals than to bring them back here to the United States? Wouldn't it potentially save a lot of taxpayer money if we were able to train them there in their homeland?
Well, Congressman, it probably would save money, but sometimes they have to do it here. And I would actually cite one of the places where they do the training, and they've had few people skip town or go AWOL, is right in your hometown. It's at in the Air Force Base Moody, right, where the best place to train those pilots is in Moody, and this is one of the success stories we highlight. And it's interesting in that area, and I think it would be worthwhile to talk to the Air Force in Moody about why they're so successful in training those pilots and mechanics, and they go back. So that is one of the success stories. And I think there they have to do the training there. And that's,
right,
again,
and I would agree, and I've been there, and I've seen what you're talking about, and it is a success story. I guess my thoughts are going beyond Moody and some specialized places where it is succeeding, and the overall potential of a national security threat when we're bringing individuals here that we don't know anything really about. They're getting military training. They go AWOL. It sounds as though there is a significant portion of this program that could wisely be done in someplace other than the United States. Would you agree with that?
I think it's worth looking into. We do discuss that, but I think a first spot is just requiring in-person interviews for these military trainees by the State Department.
And you're saying that's not happening?
That's not happening, and that's what the State Department refused to acknowledge as being helpful.
All right, and did I hear you correctly moments ago, too, that this does happen with others, but it's not happening with Afghans, is that correct?
Yes, and that's what's so perplexing, because for every other type of visa, they do in-person interviews, but they don't do it for these people.
So is there a specific policy where these individuals are waived from that particular part of vetting?
As far as I know, it's a policy of the State Department, not the policy of the Department.
Just for just for Afghans?
I can't speak beyond that, sir.
Who can give me an answer to that?
I'll have the staff who worked on it get back to you, sir.
Please do so.
John Sopko will be on this program at the top of the hour, 9 o'clock Eastern Time, and we'll take your calls. He'll be here for the full hour to talk about his group's work in Afghanistan, commissioned by Congress. And Edward is on the line from New Jersey, Hazlitt, New Jersey. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you. Yeah, I would like to say that a lot of this is brought to us. This is basically Cold War II brought to us by the people that brought us Cold War I. And if terror was the real reason why we need to be there, I mean, 14,000 people are murdered by guns in this country every year. But climate change is going to, the sea level rising is going to threaten our food production and clean water. And the people that really profit from all these wars, they're just going to take that money and move to China or these other countries that are preparing for these things in the future while we're, left holding the bag. So thank you for letting me have my comment.
Thank you. Dylan is on the line from Sturgis, South Dakota now. Dylan, you think the U.S. should stay. Tell us why.
Well, I'm a Vietnam veteran, and I've seen what happened when we pulled out of Vietnam, And I think they should just keep fighting until we just kill them all, man. But I see that these guys that were training are turning against us like they did in Vietnam. Same thing.
Okay, thanks for calling, Dylan. Dylan mentions Vietnam. Sherry at Twitter also mentions Vietnam, but in this context, after 20 years in Vietnam, you'd think our military would stop deceiving us as to why we are there. More on the sex harassment allegations on Capitol Hill. Lots more headlines. We just talked about John Conyers stepping down as ranking member on the Judiciary Committee. Here's a headline in the New York Times. It's actually the lead story. Congress facing calls to disclose sex settlements. Details or deals are kept secret. Conyers is leaving his post, they remind us. And we want to remind you that this coming week in the House, Wednesday is when it's scheduled, there will be a bill concerning anti-harassment training. The House will be in at noon for business on Wednesday. This resolution will require all members and staff to complete mandatory anti-harassment and anti-discrimination training during each session of Congress. The resolution is sponsored by Representative Barbara Comstock, Republican of Virginia, and Jackie Speer, Democrat from California, as well as several others. They took part in a hearing on all this back on November 14th, which we covered, and you can find it at our website. There's also this headline in Politico: apologetic Franken to return to the Senate today. They write that Senator Al Franken will return to work in the Senate today, his first appearance back on Capitol Hill since accusations of sex harassment surfaced against him earlier this year. He told the Minneapolis Star-Tribune that he's embarrassed and ashamed, and the first allegation against the Minnesota Democrat surfaced earlier this month, they remind us, when broadcaster Leanne Tweeden said that Franken insisted on kissing her during a rehearsal of a sketch the two performed during a 2006 USO tour. Senator Franken did an interview with lots of the local folks in Minneapolis yesterday, including a local CBS station, WCCO. Here is a short piece from that interview.
I am embarrassed and ashamed of some of what has come out. I'm going to work to regain people's trust. I think that people know that I've been a serious senator. I think people, I don't want to focus on other people. I don't want to focus on Charlie Rose. I don't want to focus on other people. I know what the allegations are with me, and all I can say is I hope that people can look at what they are and listen to my response. I am sorry. I'm going to do everything I can to earn back the trust of people that I let down, including people who consider me a champion for women.
Courtesy WCCO, the CBS station there in Minneapolis. In Politico, they also write that Franken has called for a Senate ethics investigation into his own behavior and has thus far resisted calls for his resignation. He hopes that his experience will ultimately offer a positive contribution to the conversation so I can be a better public servant and a better man. More of the quotes there from Senator Franken. And the Senate comes back into session today, later this afternoon at 4 o'clock Eastern. They're continuing to work on nominations this week in the Senate, but we do expect tax legislation to possibly hit the floor as early as the latter part of tomorrow. They have to go through another markup process at the Budget Committee to blend the tax bill with a bill concerning drilling at the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. Once that happens, We expect the bill to come to the floor. Not sure if it's fate at this point, but watch out for everything on C-SPAN 2. Back to Afghanistan now. Celia calling from Connecticut. Celia, pronounce the name of your town for me.
Good morning, C-SPAN. I thank you to spend 1 hour on this important topic, Afghanistan. We should leave Afghanistan as soon as possible. We should instead give the people all the aids they needed, such as agriculture, technology, education, etc., etc. We can train them in this country, and we can do whatever possible, but without the military force. Military force will not solve problem, but create more conflict. Thank you very much.
Thanks for calling, Celia. Horatio is calling from Navarro, Florida. Good morning.
Oh, thank you, C-SPAN.
You bet.
I am a Vietnam vet, combat wounded, and I approve that we should stay in Vietnam until our mission is accomplished. Just the other day, the commander of our troops in Vietnam said that Mr. Trump came up with a strategy that basically guarantee our win in Vietnam. So let us be thankful to God that we have such a commander in the White House. That's all I need to say.
All right, on to Patrick now in Vandergrift, PA. Where is Vandergrift, Patrick?
Northeast Pennsylvania.
Got it. Go ahead, please.
Well, I'd like to say I hear the same excuses for staying in Afghanistan that I heard when we were in Vietnam. And ever since the military complex discovered we could make more money losing wars than winning wars, we've lost every war we've been in so far.
Anything else you want to add there?
No, that's all.
All right, thanks. Here are the lines to call in if you think the U.S. should stay in Afghanistan. Call 202-748-8000. If you think the U.S. should leave, 748-8001. And we have a line for Afghanistan veterans, 202-748-8002. We've been at it for an hour and a half this morning, and we'll be at it for an hour and a half more. Strictly with your calls right now, but at 9 o'clock, John Sopko, the Special Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction, will be joining us. In the meantime, here is Nat from Baltimore. Nat, what's your view on the U.S. role and whether it should continue to stay in Afghanistan?
Hello. First, a little thing. I'm a World War II vet. I'm 90. I was on a commission at the beginning of this on what we should do. This lady, Marie, that called in was right on in that part of a thing, that the argument is strictly around drugs. The opium produced in Afghanistan in thousands and thousands of acres is the source for the world. We could wipe it out with Agent Orange or the equivalent and pay the farmers to put in other crops. They get about $200 an acre from the Taliban to process into opium. We should pay them $300 an acre. And then we would not have to worry about the problem of the government. It would automatically become very, very democratic.
Thanks for calling. Thanks for calling, Nat from Baltimore. Jim writes at Twitter, growing opium is a cultural tradition in Afghanistan. It is one of the few crops farmers can cultivate at a profit for the time being. And John Sopko, the Special Inspector General, was asked about opium production in Afghanistan. Here is an exchange with Congressman Tom Massey, Republican of Kentucky, from that recent House hearing.
How much have we spent to date eradicating poppy and in a counter-narcotics effort in total in Afghanistan?
We can't break it down to eradication, but altogether in fighting narcotics, it's $8.6 billion with a B.
8.6 billion.
That's
and
correct.
has, I know I asked this question last 18 months ago, but I'll ask it again. Has production of narcotics in Afghanistan gone up or down since 2002 when we started spending that money?
You know, I don't have the exact going back to 2002. I can tell you from 2015, it's gone up 43%.
43% in 2 years, and we're still spending billions of dollars over there to eradicate poppy. I was at a town hall type meeting this weekend in a factory in my district, And one of the attendees was a Gulf War or a Gulf veteran. And he told me he's been standing in poppy fields and marijuana fields in Afghanistan. So now I know the pictures are real that I see, that those crops are there. And he struggled, and I struggled, to try and explain to the rest of the constituents in the room how that could be possible. How is that possible, that we're spending billions of dollars and we can see it everywhere, yet it's not being destroyed?
It's possible for a couple of reasons. First of all, it's very difficult because of just the security situation. But the second reason is we have no strategy. I have complained for the last 3 or 4 years, where is the counter-narcotic strategy? Just like we have no strategy for fighting corruption. You need a strategy. Then you have a strategy, as the good congressman. Then you look at inputs, outputs, and outcomes. You get metrics. We have no metrics. We have no strategy. Now, what concerns me is that when General Nicholson or General Dunford testify that 60% of the funding going to the Taliban terrorists comes from narcotics trafficking, and we have no strategy. Now, I think we all read in the press about how we focused on ISIS and their relationship to oil production, and we bombed the heck out of that oil production to cut off that funding source. Poor General Nicholson is trying to fight the Taliban, and no one's focusing on 60% of the funding going to the Taliban. Now, that's a serious problem. And if that is the proverbial elephant in the room. We are never going to win in Afghanistan if we don't focus on the whole narcotics problem.
John Sopko will be with us in 25 minutes here in our studio. At our Facebook page, Charlotte writes that leave. That's her opinion. We have only spent $850 billion on the Afghanistan conflict and suffered 2,400 dead. The theory is we're bombing the Taliban so we can build a pipeline where we pretend we care about links to terrorism. It is the most messed up strategy. We got into a real fine mess. Hayward writes that, good morning, as an Afghan American, I would like to give 2 options. One, as an Afghan, Afghanistan definitely needs the U.S. to stay there, as they have not been able to stabilize the country for 4 decades. They have countries like Pakistan and Iran as their neighbors, and those countries want Afghanistan to be unstable for their own interests. So, if the U.S. leaves, Afghanistan will go down. Let's go to Scott now. Scott is calling from West Virginia. Scott, what's the name of your town?
Roncevert, West Virginia.
Roncevert, West Virginia. Give us your opinion on Afghanistan.
Well, I feel that, if we want to put America first, then we should start tightening our belt strings and realize that we're spending money hand over fist on things that have nothing to do with our benefit. Sure, we want to stop the drugs from Afghanistan, but if that's our goal, then let that be our goal. Don't just, be there and not have a goal. But my biggest concern is, why did we make it such a big deal when the Soviet Union entered Afghanistan? And then when we went in there, it was kind of looked at as being, something we had to do. I just don't understand how we can look at something so negatively when another country does what we do.
Thank you, Scott. Dean is calling now from Riverside in Rhode Island. Good morning, Dean.
Good morning. I'm on the side of stay in Afghanistan.
How come?
If you leave, it will just devolve into chaos. If you look at the past history with the U.S. involvement in South Korea, Taiwan, those countries are free today because of us. If we had left South Korea, that would be part of North Korea, it'd be part of China. I mean, we're fighting the Chinese there. So Afghanistan, we'll be back there if we don't stay, because the terrorists and these Islamists, fundamentalists, are there. So if you're not there, it's harder to find out where they are and how to, work to eradicate them. Although I don't know if it's possible.
Okay. That was Dean. We move on to Bernard now. Bernard is in Suitland, Maryland. Welcome to the program, Bernard. What do you think?
Well, as a veteran, first-year veteran of the military, I believe that we should get out of Afghanistan. I think the reason that we went to Afghanistan and the reason that we're still there is because of the military-industrial complex. They make countless amount of money dropping bombs and munitions in Afghanistan.
Thank you, Bernard. Greg. Greg is in Baltimore, in Maryland. Greg, you think the U.S. should stay in Afghanistan? Give us your thoughts.
Well, I think that, John is a little off. I think we actually do have a strategy. Unfortunately, it's incredibly short-sighted. We try and pay farmers to grow regular crops. And, of course they're going to grow opium when it's a major cash crop. We need to, if we're going to subsidize farmers, that's all well and good, but we need to start with a long-term strategy, starting with education of the people on the ground. We should have sent infrastructure after the initial Afghani war. If we sent infrastructure and education into that country, we would not be having this issue, and I totally agree with your past callers that we're going to end up back in Afghanistan if we pull out right now anyway, or if it's not us, it was the Russians before us, it might be NATO after us. Thank you.
And William from Joplin, Missouri. William, you think the U.S. should leave. Tell us why.
Well, first of all, the Taliban, since we've been over there, has gained 3/4 more territory than they had. And the Taliban over there is tribal, and it's been going on for thousands of years. And we're over there for the pipeline. And as far as the opium being grown over there, the Taliban had it just about wiped out. And then we came over there, and then all of a sudden the crop's gone. And there's no bomb that creates peace. Look at China, They got that one road. They don't go in. They go in with peace. And all our congressmen, they all invest in the warfare, Lockheed and all that. So it's all about money, Yes, we need to educate the people and stuff, but everybody's mad at everybody over health care and over this and that. This people entitlements, they call it now, instead of helping the poor. Everybody's mad about it, but nobody says anything about $440 million an hour we spend over there. They spent $500,000 and built one gas station, and it was for electric cars, and they don't even have electric cars over there, so it's just a big waste of our money. That's all I got to say.
That was William at Twitter. One viewer, Sigmund Freud, writes, we have no strategy because we have no mission in Afghanistan. Ken is on the line now from Bristol, Tennessee. Ken, what are your thoughts on the future of the U.S. in Afghanistan?
Well, I'm kind of split, but stay would be the thing if we had a strategy to win this. We need to bring the indigenous people on board with the United States and not force anything down their throat. 60 years old. No intervention since World War II that I know of has turned out good for the United States. I can't think of one. We're dealing with Korea. Iran we intervened in 54. It's a problem now. Maybe Grenada. We went in there and did what we set out to do, and then we left. And they celebrate that day just like Thanksgiving, and they are pro-American. We need to develop a strategy. We need to stay, or we're going to have something worse hit us down the road in maybe 10 to 20 years if we just abruptly leave.
Ken, thank you for participation in the program. At Twitter, Mary writes, stay or leave. Should have never been in Afghanistan or Iraq at all. Should have punished the Saudis, if anyone. Also, American One writes, why do we have an election in Afghanistan and ask the people what they want us to do? Kim writes that at Facebook, we can't go into a country and get the locals to fight bad guys with us and then leave them to die a certain death. We went in there under G.W. Bush, so we must stay there at some capacity to help the new government until a time when the government can sustain a way of life for their people. Matt writes, meantime, that keep resources in the area in support to support Afghan forces, but withdraw the bulk of our forces. Some air power and a quick reaction force, a QRF, he writes, would be sufficient. The Afghan army will either step up or we will pull out altogether. Another preview here of John Sopko, who will be on the program coming up at 9 o'clock Eastern Time. If you missed the earlier part of the program, we'll show you this clip again. One of the earlier pieces from a hearing he recently did on the House side. Chairman of the Oversight Committee, one of the subcommittees on national security, Ron DeSantis, Republican of Florida, talked to John Sopko about his recent trip to Afghanistan and his thoughts on the situation there. Here's a look.
You got to meet, I think, as you alluded to, a lot of the folks on the ground. You know, just the average American were to come up to you and say, you know, what is going on in Afghanistan? What's the elevator speech you'd give them?
It's a stalemate. And the big question is it a stalemate going down or is it a stalemate going up? And I don't have a good answer for that, sir.
You, SIGAR's Security Assistance Lessons Learned report is very extensive. What would you say the bottom line of that report is?
The bottom line is the U.S. government was ill-prepared to conduct a security sector mission. They didn't understand the size and scope of what they were facing. Our normal security sector assistance is to a developed country. We're helping, let's say, the Turks with a new weapon system. We're helping the Koreans with a new personnel system. This was designing and building an entire military and entire police force. The other problem is we were totally misaligned in our capabilities with their needs, disorganized, did not fully understand and utilize NATO for the things that they could provide. And we have detailed a number of problems with giving too complicated systems, having military officers in the U.S. trying to teach police, having Air Force pilots teaching police, having people who know nothing about personnel systems teaching ministries on how to develop personnel systems. So that was the big problem that we found. Those are the findings and lessons of the report.
Moving on to Grants Pass, Oregon now. Katie is calling. Katie, what are your thoughts on whether the U.S. should stay or leave Afghanistan?
Oh, I definitely think we should leave. I don't think we could be redeemed in the Afghanis' eyes. I mean, anybody out there that is for us staying, how would you feel if Afghanistan came over here and decided they were going to tell us how to live? I know I wouldn't like it. So I don't know. You know, I heard at the beginning of the show, same old stuff. You know, I remember it from way back around 2003, same old BS. I just, we can't afford it. Now we're going for a tax cut. I mean, World War II, we were taxed. Everybody, you know, put in for that war. I don't understand. How are we going to pay for this and have a tax cut too? It's just bad all around. Bad for the Afghanis, bad for us.
All right.
Thank you.
Katie calling there on the leave line. On the stay line, stay in Afghanistan, is Peter from Alexandria, Virginia. Peter, good morning. Tell us why you think the U.S. should stay.
Well, I was over there as a civilian from 2011 to 2013 in Kandahar.
Mm-hmm.
And as being involved with contracting with the Corps of Engineers, I could see a lot of waste. And my impression was that a lot of money was spent that could have been managed better. And when the pull down came in 2013, everything was winding down, and you can kind of see that a lot of the contractors that were there, that were the Afghan contractors as well as the Turkish, were wondering why we were drawing down so fast. And I met with a local Afghan contractor, and he told me, he said, well, you guys leave, that's fine. I'm just going to go back to growing poppy. My family has lots of land around Kandahar, and we'll go back to it. And my impression overall was that we could have stayed there if we had managed our resources better. These people would happily work for $2 a day. And
Peter, let me show you a headline. Peter, let me show you a headline from one of your local papers here, the Washington Post. Afghan leaders in Helmand province are criticizing the U.S. airstrikes on the Taliban drug labs, a story that burst out in the last couple of weeks. What do you make of that strategy, if you can call it that?
If they're trying to bomb, are they trying to bomb the poppy fields, or where they're processing it, or
the processing labs? It says.
Yeah, that's a waste. They're going to grow. It's so poor over there. The economy will revert back to what it has to, and it's so dry that the poppy will grow. It's very hard to eradicate something if there's no other alternative. And we were providing an alternative, and we didn't have to spend as much money to do it. And I think some of the projects that we had, the ring road that goes around the country, was a very good project. And
I think we lost Peter there, but we do get the point of what you're saying. Here's a little bit more from that story written by Pamela Constable of the Washington Post, who we spoke to by phone earlier in this morning. She recently wrote that a newly announced campaign of U.S. and Afghan airstrikes against Taliban-run narcotic centers was met with alarm and criticism last week from political leaders in Helmand province, the heart of Afghanistan's huge opium trade, where officials said 10 such air attacks were carried out in the past week. Some legislators and provincial representatives expressed worries that civilians could be harmed. Others dismissed the campaign, announced by U.S. military officials last week, as a dramatic but misplaced effort to showcase Washington's determination to go after insurgent bastions and criminal activities as part of its new strategy. That's in the Washington Post. About 10 more minutes of your calls on whether the U.S. should stay or leave Afghanistan. Harriet is calling from Greenbelt, Maryland now. Good morning, Harriet.
Good morning. Good morning.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a first-time caller. I listen every day.
Glad to have you.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
It's surprising to me that if we spend $6 billion, as I heard the gentleman say, who's coming on at 9, to destroy these crops, and they are still producing 65%. Why are we wasting money? It seems like such a waste. You know, we as Americans who send our tax money to the government to be used more wisely. They can take money from the poor, but yet they can spend $6 billion to destroy something that's not being destroyed. It's ridiculous. In addition, one other comment, if I may.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what's going on Capitol Hill with the sexual abuse that these people are putting against women? I think somebody there on Capitol Hill should put forth a bill that brings all of this out, and the bill should be passed by everybody in the House and the Senate, so we all know what is going on. These are crooked people that cover their own butts and can send me to jail for what they're doing. So thank you.
Thanks for calling. Elbert is in DeSoto, Missouri now. Elbert is calling on the line for those who think the U.S. should stay. Good morning to you, Elbert. Welcome.
Well, the stay is not my biggest thing. My biggest thing is, why don't we buy that stuff? You can make morphine out of that, which hospitals use all over the world. The big problem is you have to satisfy the Turks, who actually buy more morphine. I guess they buy from the Taliban, I'm not sure. But those people can't make anywhere near the money they can make. Let them grow. Let them grow the poppies. Use them. Buy them. Stabilize them. What we've done is we went in and militarily caused disruption where the Taliban killed the locals, and then on top of that, we take away their main source of income. That's kind of super stupid. So I think that's my comment. They just should buy the stuff and move it around. What they've done, the harm they've done by influencing the Taliban's or increasing the Taliban's influence, I don't know how they would do much about that, except if they let the morphine go and try to improve that country at the local village level instead of staying in Kabul training people, which is what we tried to do in Vietnam. You know, we had all kinds of trained South Vietnamese, but no influence in local villages. We had to get out of there as quick as we could. That's all I can say. They seem to be doing the same thing here.
Okay. Sal is on the line now from Massachusetts, Mansfield, Massachusetts. Sal, your view on Afghanistan?
Yes, sir. This whole thing is a farce. As far as training the Afghan army, these people have been fighting for thousands of years. They should be training our army. These people are natural-born killers. The only reason why the government tolerates us there is that they want our arms. They want our weapons, which will be used against us someday. We got to get out of there. It's a waste of money. And that's what I have to say today. Thank you.
All right, on to Rick now from Illinois, Springfield, Illinois. Good morning, Rick.
Good morning. Thank you for taking my call.
You bet.
And my comment would have to be that the reason that we should stay is the fact that we haven't done what we should be doing all along, or at least not enough of it. The previous caller that was talking about building infrastructure is spot on. The thing that we need to be doing and spending more money on is building infrastructure. If you remember the movie Charlie Wilson's War, at the end of that, after the United States supported the Afghans to expel Russians, Charlie Wilson tried to get money to build schools. And the United States wouldn't do that, even though it was just a small fraction of what it would cost to arm the Afghanistans, which eventually those weapons found their way into the Taliban hands. So I think that just for goodwill's sake, if we spend the money that we're spending on the military to build infrastructure, we'd be better off.
Okay.
And that's my thought on the matter. Thank you very much.
Voice of Rick there. Time for a couple of more calls this hour before we bring on John Sopko, the Special Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction. Other news out there in the fiscal, money, financial areas, consumer areas. Here's a USA Today headline, Record Cyber Monday. That's today, could signal full spirit. They remind us that retailers got off to a strong start to the holiday season over Thanksgiving weekend as shoppers set records in online purchases and hit the malls in a big way. One of the figures here is $5.03 billion for Black Friday shoppers. The Cyber Monday forecast is $6.6 billion. In the Wall Street Journal today, fewer pitfalls are seen for Powell. In confirmation, what they're talking about is a hearing tomorrow on the new chairman of the Federal Reserve, Jerome Powell, likely to sail through confirmation as Fed chair, even though the process has grown increasingly politicized since the days when Ben Bernanke was confirmed as Fed chief in 2006 by voice vote with little opposition. Mr. Powell, now a Fed governor, heads into his confirmation hearing Tuesday before Senate banking, having garnered support from Republicans and Democrats. It isn't the first time he has been a Fed candidate who offered the path of least resistance, writes the Wall Street Journal. We'll have a good part of that hearing on tomorrow morning here on C-SPAN at 10 a.m. Eastern Time, the confirmation hearing for Jerome Powell for the Fed. Also back to USA Today, the headline here says both sides in net neutrality fight make their cases. As FCC vote nears, opponents are hoping to make the stand against the FCC's plan to overturn net neutrality rules, saying the revisions would hurt consumers and businesses alike. If the FCC's proposed rules are passed, it would be seen as a victory for big telecom and cable companies like AT&T, Comcast, and Verizon, which provide broadband connections to more than 94.5 million homes, according to the Leichtman Research Group. It would overturn the so-called net neutrality regulations that went into effect during the Obama administration. Here's a quote: "This vote will negatively impact small and medium-sized internet businesses and has the potential to decrease jobs and economic growth system-wide." This from Christian Dawson, executive director of the I2 Coalition, which includes Amazon and Google. That's in U.S. News and World Report, or I'm sorry, USA Today. You can read it at usatoday.com. James is calling from Woodbridge, Virginia. Good morning.
Good morning.
Yes, sir.
I'm a Vietnam veteran. You know, this what we had in Afghan is just like Vietnam. The Russians were in Afghan before us, and we supported trying to get them out. And now the Russians are trying to support getting us out. You know, everywhere you look, it's an AK-47. We know where they came from. The whole point is absurd. We go in there with one reason: to get bin Laden. in many years later, we're pulling them out of Pakistan instead of Afghan. And the Taliban are residents. You know, they're a tribal group that's lived in Afghan Pakistan for 1,000 years or more. So what are we doing? You know, it's nothing more than the same in Iraq. There's no reason to be there. Come on, I'm ex-military. I did my 20 years, but I see no sense of it. We don't have the justification. Just get out and use our money in more reasonable ways. Thank you.
Thanks for calling. Final call for this hour is from Bill. Bill is in Concord, New Hampshire. Bill, thank you for calling.
Hi, yeah, I was a contractor, and I advised the Afghan National Police when I was over there. I'm really on the fence. On the one hand, it's either a sunken cost, and we need to get out, but we've invested so much, and the potential is there for some kind of democracy to appear. I think a different approach would be more successful. I saw problems I saw with U.S. military command. No continuity. There were several commanders over several years, and individual advisors. Although the units did group rotations, individual advisors were in and out in 6 or 9 months, and they were repeating the same mistakes. And the advisors were the civilian advisors, like myself, were the only continuity. The Afghans, on their part, I think they need better oversight of the money we give them. We need to take a better look, like what your previous callers had mentioned. And I told the folks I work with when I left, I said you can either go the route of South Korea or South Vietnam, and one's not there and one's a thriving democracy and an economic power.
Bill, thank you for calling, and thanks to everybody who called for these past 2 hours. It's 9 o'clock now here in Washington, D.C., and we've been talking about Afghanistan all morning, and we'll continue for the next hour. But some facts and figures about the Afghan war from the Inspector General, the Defense Department, Brown University, remind us that this war started in October 7th of 2001. It's the longest war in U.S. history. Reconstruction costs since 2001, $714 billion. U.S. casualties, 2,350. U.S. wounded, 20,000. We'll talk more about money and reconstruction in general coming up in a moment or two with John Sopko, who is the Special Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction. He'll be with us for the entire hour, and we'll take your calls. We'll be right back.
Washington Journal continues.
And taking us deeper inside Afghanistan is John Sopko, the Special Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction, also known as the SIGAR. Mr. Sopko, thank you for joining us. Remind us of how your office came to be and what the role is.
Okay, certainly. And first of all, it's a pleasure to be here, and I admire you for putting on these 3 hours on Afghanistan. It is our longest serving war, and we need more people to focus on it. I think that's very important. SIGAR, my little agency with that tobacco-sounding acronym, was created in 2008. And basically, Congress realized that we were spending a lot of money there. We didn't do a very good job of overseeing how the money was spent in Iraq, so they created a special agency. We're an Inspector General's office. We do audits. We do criminal investigations. There's about 200 of us. We only focus on Afghanistan, and we only focus on reconstruction. And one of the reasons Congress did this is because we've spent more money on reconstruction in Afghanistan than we've ever done anywhere in the world. We spent more money in Afghanistan than we did on the entire Marshall Plan to rebuild Europe after World War II. So Congress assumed, and I think correctly, that they needed a special agency just to look at it. And we've been in existence since then.
And you put out regular reports. Here is the latest one from October 30th of this year. How often does the SIGAR's office put out these reports to Congress?
Well, we put out quarterly reports. Unlike the other inspectors general who put out semi-annual, we put out quarterly reports. Plus, we issue lessons learned reports on a regular basis. We also issue audits, investigations, and inspection reports on a regular basis.
And what is the summary of this report? What is new and different from the last one?
Well, the quarterly report summarizes what has happened significantly on reconstruction for the last quarter. We're required to do that by statute that set us up. What was important there was we focused on the The classification issue, which was new. They've classified a lot of information that has been unclassified before. We also focused on the casualty issue, the amount of territory under control by the Afghan government, which has decreased to the lowest level since we started collecting data on that. And again, we focused on the economic issue. The economy hasn't turned around for them. They're facing a bulge in population. They don't have the jobs. They don't have the economy. So that's the main thrust of the report.
We'll keep the phone numbers on the bottom of the screen for John Sopko, the Special Inspector General for Afghanistan. And we'll get your calls going in just a couple of minutes. If you think the U.S. should stay in Afghanistan, call 202-748-8000. And if you think the U.S. should leave, 748-8001. Afghan war veterans, 202-748-8003 is your number. Mr. Sopko, you've been at it in this particular position with this office, coming up on 6 years now. How would you describe the overall condition of the country currently as we head into 2018, in addition to the effort by the U.S. and any allies over the years to build up that country?
It's not a black-white issue here. There's a mix. There's a mix of some success and some failures. Overall, the security situation has deteriorated over the 6 years that I've been doing this job. Although it's stabilized into a stalemate now, we have a better working relationship with the new Afghan government. They're very cooperative. They are interested in changing. They're interested in changing their military, and they're also interested in attacking the serious problem of corruption, which is rampant throughout the country. And you're not going to win there unless you deal with the corruption issue. And I think they're serious about now addressing the narcotics problem. That's the 800-pound gorilla, which I think I was quoted as saying before in the room, where the Taliban and the insurgency get most of their funding from the drug trade. And if we don't do anything about that, we're never going to win.
In the report, before we get to calls, you have a status of funds section here, and the headline says Afghanistan Reconstruction Funding Pipeline. And you point out since 2002, Congress has appropriated approximately $120 billion for Afghanistan relief and reconstruction. You have a chart here which breaks everything down. Explain to our viewers what we're looking at here and what the significance is.
Well, that particular chart tries to break down just that reconstruction number. If you look at the war fighting, which is, I think, the higher figure you've quoted, which comes from Brown and Harvard University, that's about $700 billion they're talking about. But the actual reconstruction, that's the money spent to pay salaries of Afghan soldiers and police and civil servants, that's to build roads, that's to pay the salaries of civil servants, that's to build clinics, etc. That's what that chart breaks down. It shows how much money is spent for security issues. About $70 billion of that $120 billion goes to the police and the security forces and the military, and then the rest goes to either humanitarian aid, civilian operations, or governance.
What is your sense coming out of a recent hearing that you had on the House side of where Congress is on Afghanistan right now and how it views the current effort there?
Well, it's hard for me to speak for all of Congress. That was just a subcommittee of a very important subcommittee of a very important committee, the Oversight and Government Reform Committee in the House. But from talking to members, and I think even talking to citizens, I think there's a war weariness. There's a weariness about the money. There's a question about when it's going to end, and there's a question about when we're going to get it right. Now, we're cautiously optimistic with the new strategy that we're going to get it right. I think that strategy is more realistic. It's based upon what's going on the ground right now, rather than arbitrary timelines, which I think was an accurate criticism of prior strategies.
Does the CGAR's office and the reports you put out have any connection to the White House? This is written for Congress, but does the White House read these reports? Do they act on anything? Do they take recommendations?
Oh, I can't speak for the White House itself, but I
Sure.
can speak for the administration. The reports go to the various agencies we look at, as well as Congress. So Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense, and any other agency that's working in Afghanistan. And they do read them. They do respond, and I think we're cautiously optimistic. As a matter of fact, we're very happy in the last 6 months, the reaction that the Department of Defense has had toward many of our reports. Secretary Mattis issued a policy statement to all of his senior leadership based upon one of our reports. It was a report dealing with camouflage uniforms, which were poorly decided, and we may have wasted millions of dollars on it. And so we're getting a big response. We're getting a very positive response. Secretary Dunford, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, General Dunford, in recent testimony commented about how they use our information. The one thing we offer is we have institutional memory. A lot of the agencies don't anymore. And the people serving in Afghanistan, although some have gone through multiple tours, but many stay 6 months, 9 months, a year at most. We have people in Afghanistan who are serving 2 to 3 years, and of course our agency's been around for a while. So people are relying on our institutional memory also.
Lots of calls continuing to come in on Afghanistan this morning now for John Sopko, the Special Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction. Chris, you are up first from Katy, Texas. Good morning.
Great. Thank you so much for taking my call. I have a couple questions in regards to the drug trade and the mineral deposits in Afghanistan. The government narrative since 2001 is that this isn't a war, that this is not a war of choice, that it's a war of necessity. Both Presidents Bush and Obama referenced 9/11, and I think it's important to note that the timing of military action in Afghanistan, as you know, came 27 days after 9/11. But since 2001, the production of opium has increased, providing upwards of 90% of the non-pharmaceutical grade opiates of the world market. So that originated, the world market originated in Afghanistan, affecting Europe, Central Asia, Russia, etc. Also important to note is the precious metal deposits, including the huge veins of iron, copper, cobalt, gold, among others. Important to note the critical industrial metals like lithium. It's been said that Afghanistan's been characterized as the Saudi Arabia of lithium. And Karzai even claimed that the mineral deposits there are actually worth upwards of 30 trillion, a quantity that would exceed total global mining revenues by a factor of approximately 60%. These are my questions. You characterize the situation there as a stalemate. Does that not indicate that our shadow operation there is going according to plan? And in terms of war, is this not business as usual? Because it seems we have our military on the ground there protecting these assets, protecting the opium fields, and then we have other countries like China mining these assets and using their cheap labor to benefit global trade with the United States.
Chris, thank you for calling. John Sopko.
Well, first of all, I don't do policy, I do process. But I can say, based upon my experience and the experience of my office, and we're actually doing a lessons learned report on how we got into Afghanistan and the strategy and planning for that. We have seen no evidence that we went into Afghanistan either to improve or capitalize on the scourge of opium. There's no evidence of that. So I can say that much. As for why we went in on extractives or the minerals, we have gotten very little of anything from the minerals, or we call extractives, which can also mean oil and natural gas. So that, again, we have found no evidence. We have seen nothing that would corroborate that. We have tried to develop the extractives industry so that the Afghan people will do better, so they can start exporting something other than drugs. But so in response to the implication that there's a
shadow operation, I'm not aware of any.
You mentioned you don't do policy, but process. But to that caller and several other callers in this program so far, we talked about opium. We talked a little bit about the recent bombing campaign against some of the processing plants there. Does that action affect your process, the process of understanding what's going on there?
Well, look at the stated policy is done by the policymakers. We look at how you can effectuate and how you can succeed on that policy. So the government gives us the policy. We see how well you can do it. When you talk about narcotics, we've been harping on this for years, that you're never going to win the war, if that's your objective, on the Taliban unless you cut their funding. And our sources and government sources and other experts we've dealt with have said, and now General Nicholson has said publicly, that over 60% of the funding for the Taliban comes from that. So we're stating you got to do something about it if your objective is to win with the Taliban. Now, whether you should do bombing or maybe you should use DEA, those are processes that the policymakers will decide on. We are glad that General Nicholson has now got the authority and he can focus on it, and we're glad, equally important, that the Afghan government is willing to go in that direction too. So the prior regime in Afghanistan was not interested in confronting narcotics, and unless you got a cooperative government there, you're never going to win on narcotics.
Let's hear from Spokane, Washington now. Spokane, what is your name?
It's TV Kippis. How you doing?
Go ahead, sir.
TV. Good morning. Thank you for taking my call.
Good morning.
Actually, I kind of want to echo Chris's concerns, because I was under the impression that prior to 9/11, the Taliban's religious doctrine did not allow drugs or alcohol. The Taliban was actually, weren't they not allowing opium growth in Taliban-controlled areas? Now they're doing it to finance it because they can't get it. But their primary financing back there was through Pakistan and Iran and Iraq and different areas like this. They were trying to play their own political games within the Taliban. So now we're being told that the Taliban were the ones that were promoting the opium issue. I truly believe actually it was marketing plan from the insurance industries right from the start. Cheap narcotics. Now they've got a major portion of America basically hooked on opioids through the doctor's offices mostly, and now we're being told it's a different story. Correct me if I'm wrong. Was the Taliban against drugs and alcohol, and did the Taliban allow opium growth in their controlled regions before 9/11?
Thank you.
That's my only question.
Let's hear from our guest.
For a brief period there, the Taliban stopped the production of opium. I think they did it for political reasons. They wanted to get recognition by the international community. The Taliban at that time was the government, so they could raise funding or raise money through various and sundry methods. But they did for a brief period there, right before the attack, 9/11.
How powerful is the Taliban today? And speak to us about the land that it has taken back, if you want to put it that way, in recent years.
Well, that's one of the significant findings of our latest quarterly report. The Taliban have increased. This is the largest, I wouldn't say largest, but this is the most control they have over the country we identified in the quarterly report this year. It's hard to identify because there's areas that they control, districts that they control, and then districts that they have influence on. Likewise, the same thing for the government. But right now, I think our data is that as of August 2017, there were 54 districts under insurgent control, an increase of 9 districts over the last 6 months. So about 3.7 million Afghans, which is 11% of the population, now live in districts under insurgent control or influence.
General Nicholson, we read, wants to retake 80% of that territory back in 2 years. Realistic?
It could be done. It's going to be a hard job. and a hard task. But he has a new strategy on that, and he has additional troops for the training, and he has also additional authorities. So we are, again, cautiously optimistic. My job is basically the referee. I'm here to see what happens and report on it. So we wish him the best, and we're optimistic.
Moving on to Mark now in Whitehall, Pennsylvania for John Sopko. Good morning, Mark.
Good morning. Hello, Mr. Sopko. How are you doing? Just wanted to give you a call. There are a few issues. As far as when I get my information from like different college professors and try to keep my eyes open, different things like that. Let's see. There was the Clinton machine supposedly wined and dined the Taliban. It's according to one of the professors here in Lehigh Valley to get transfer fees for the TAPI pipeline. And I'm going to take a segue into Wathari Mungari, the Nobel Peace Prize winner, that says today's wars are only fought over natural resources. And then I just want to get into the Department of Defense. Well, okay, so then there was 9/11, which I'm going to be frank. I don't believe it was what we were told. I believe the conspiracy was the one that we were shown on TV, and the truth lies elsewhere, but I'm not going to get into that. There's also another thing, Department of Defense. Okay, so then if we're going to be over there for 15, 20, 30 years, we might as well just be called the Department of Offense, because I also watch C-SPAN pretty much. And as far as actual terrorist attacks in this country, very, very slim. There's been a lot of, on the corporate media, you'll see a lot of breaking news and shootings and things like that. But it's not the Taliban that's over here. So if you look at the stats on terrorist attacks, you'll see that that really there really aren't any. I mean, so there's a lot of fear mongering that goes on with the corporate media. And let me emphasize that again.
All right, so Mark, let me jump in. You're making your points. Question for our guest specifically? Oh yeah. So I mean, why stay over there for forever and ever and ever? It's we don't want to top Vietnam. I mean, that was bad enough. I mean, naturally we don't have the draft anymore, but I mean, as far as I'm concerned, why don't we just let these countries, if they want to wheel and deal with oil and stuff like that, and Central Asian oil, and get. I mean, why do we have to be over there with a military boot? Proving that we're going to use coercion. Mark, we do get the points. Want to move on to some other callers, Mr. Sopko?
Well, real quickly, again, Mark, I don't. These are all good questions. You should ask of the policymakers, the administration and Congress. I don't do policy, I do process. The policy is stated by every administration since 9/11 is we are going in there to find the people who attacked us. And I beg to disagree, Mark. I actually do think it wasn't a grand conspiracy. We were attacked. And we went in to find the people who did that, and we went in there to help create a host government, an Afghan government, that could continue to keep the terrorists out of that area so it would not be used to attack us again or attack any of our allies. And that is the stated goal, as General Mattis and as the President has stated recently, and we support that goal.
And Harris is calling from Gainesville, Florida now for John Sopko. Good morning.
Good morning. Yes. I just have three real short questions.
Okay.
I read his report quarterly, and in fact, it's in front of me. Number one is you omit how many civilian casualties there are. Why do you omit that? And if you have any idea what are the civilian casualty caused by our bombing and the Afghan national government. Secondly, your report has always been very critical of ANDSF. And in lieu of that, you are saying that General Nicholson is going to change the course of the war, or if we give them $70 billion a year and they can't even carry a gun, I mean, what's the use? Again, this is a policy matter, but in your assessment, why does General Nicholson is so dependent on that? And the last thing is, in your own process of writing these reports, do you get embedded with the U.S. military, or you just go free trekking over there with a backpack and start checking on things? Thank you very much.
Thanks for calling, Harris in Gainesville, Florida. How about that first point first? How do you do your work?
Well, we work with the military. The military will provide security for us when we go out into the field. We also get security from the State Department. So we don't embed per se, but they provide security where they can. But we're limited because of the security situation, the fact that it's very insecure. We don't just throw backpacks on and wander around the country. So we take security very seriously, so we're limited in doing that. We also have civil society organizations that we've trained, and we use them. We also use satellites where we can, and we collect data from other people operating in the country. So that's how we work. And we got about 30, 35 people there full time, all the time. We have the largest oversight presence of any government agency. So that's that one question. On the $70 billion spent a year, and I think I don't want to confuse the listener or any of your audience. When we talk about $120 billion or the larger figure, that's spent from 2001 to date. What we are spending just on reconstruction here is, and I think we noted in the quarterly, is we have about $7.42 billion in the pipeline. That's been authorized, appropriated, but not yet spent. And we spend approximately $5 to $6 billion a year. That's what we assume is going to be spent this year on reconstruction. So it's not the $70 billion per year. I think there was a question about how General Nicholson...
He wanted some clarification, too, on civilian casualties.
Sure. Well, we cite... We don't have the actual data. We were citing UNAMA, which is the UN organization, which collects data on a regular basis, and they're a very trustworthy, obviously, organization. They are able to get out to a lot of places we don't. And they noted that there was a 52% increase in civilian casualties from pro-government, that's coalition and Afghan air operations, in the first 9 months. Now, overall, the number of casualties have decreased a bit this quarter, but those caused by the Afghans and coalition forces has increased a little.
More about your work. There's this headline in the Washington Examiner and elsewhere concerning classification of data. This headline says U.S. military classifies Afghanistan data as Taliban make gains. The piece says the U.S. military is sharply restricting the information that the independent Pentagon watchdog can make public about the key measures of success in the war. They're talking about your office here. What's going on?
Well, this quarter they started classifying a lot of information that we had been previously reporting publicly for years. And some of it includes casualties by the Afghans, force strength, operational readiness, attrition figures, and even the number of women they have in their military and police. And we, again, don't do classification. We were a bit concerned by this classification. Our concern is that this is overclassification. And we are a strong proponent of transparency. We feel that the American people, you, the taxpayer, should know how your money's being spent. And by classifying this, we can't tell if we're winning or losing. We can't tell if that money is actually being used or wasted. And so that's why we've strongly objected to this latest round of classification.
And here is a memorandum written from the Research Directorate to you about all of this, about classified or restricted information. You can see here. Can folks read this report publicly? And if so, where?
The quarterly report is public. It's available on our website, and that's www.sigar.mil, and that's the quarterly report. As a matter of fact, all of our reports, unless they're classified or otherwise would implicate security issues, all of these reports are available on the website.
We have about 30 minutes left with our guest, John Sopko, who is the Special Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction. Back to your calls, and Deborah is up now from Chicopee, Massachusetts. Good morning.
Yes, good morning. I want to focus on what Mr. Sopko just said. Quote, we can't tell whether we're winning or losing. Okay, that just goes to the heart of the problem. This is not about Afghanistan. This is about the 5 U.S. weapons dealers who make $1 trillion a year in selling weapon systems to the hot zones. And we are in a hot zone. Well, there's a reason for that, because we're selling those weapon systems, and those come back and kill our troops. And number two, you said that you can only quote the amount of money for reconstruction. Well, it may be $6 billion, but what else are we spending our money on? Keeping our troops from being murdered by the weapons that we sell to Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, all of those countries. You know, the American people are beginning to realize that we're there for a reason, but they don't know why. And this is the reason, because we need to keep Grumman, Lockheed, Boeing, and Rockwell selling those weapons so the 250,000 people who work for them in this country will make good salaries, but they make huge profits. And that's all I have to say. It's very simple to figure this out. You're just there because we're, as a smokescreen for the rest of it, for what's going on there. And our troops are being killed by the weapon systems that we're selling to these Middle East countries.
That was Deborah. John Sopko, your reaction to that?
Well, I hope we're more than a smokescreen. But I mean, that's obviously the caller is raising issues going beyond my jurisdiction and my country. But again, we give you the facts on Afghanistan and reconstruction. The other inspectors generals who are working in other areas hopefully will give you the facts also. And I'm a firm believer, as I think it was Lincoln who said, if the people have the facts, we will be free. And that's what this is all about.
And Paul is calling from New York City. Good morning, Paul.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I want to thank you for your work, sir. You guys did a very interesting report in which you indicated that there were these planes that were bought from Italy, I think C-27As, that cost like about $500 million and ended up being scrap metal. And I was just wondering, first of all, was anybody ever punished for that? And if not, why not? It just seems so incredibly outrageous. And just the amount of money that's being spent in a country that had a very small economy to begin with, you would expect to see a lot more that would have come out of it. And I just think it's kind of it's incredibly disturbing. You mentioned how long this war has been going on, how much money's been spent, and first of all, just this one example, whatever happened, did anybody get punished? And if not, why not? And then just in general, how do we think about that much money being spent in that kind of a small economy and just such lousy results? I just really would like to hear your response to those two things. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Paul. Mr. Sopko.
Paul, those are all very good questions, and I wish I could tell you somebody was punished on the purchase of those airplanes that were purchased out of a boneyard in Italy, and the planes were basically death traps. They couldn't fly, they weren't the appropriate plane. We have an ongoing investigation, criminal of nature, that we can't really discuss in great detail. We also have an audit that we've initiated, and hopefully we'll be able to answer the questions. But I'm outraged. I get angry when I see money like that wasted, and we will get to the bottom of that, I promise you. Even if we don't bring criminal charges, we will identify why the taxpayer lost so much money. And the Afghans got nothing out of it. Now, as for another issue you have there, and that is about accountability. That is one of the most serious issues, I think, if you read all of our reports. No one's ever held accountable for wasting money. And if you look at every one of our reports, and every time I've testified, every time, we're not holding people accountable.
And why is that?
You know, I wish I had the answer. I think it goes back to we have a lousy HR system and our human resources system. The problems we see in Afghanistan are not because the people we have sent to the Afghanistan, the troops, the soldiers, the foreign service officers, the aid officers, they're all decent people, or 99% of them are. It's not that they're evil. It's not that they're stupid. What we've done is we've given them a box of broken tools. And those broken tools are the same tools that you see when you do a series on the VA, on Health and Human Services, on the IRS, and all the other government agencies. Our procurement system is busted. Our HR system is busted. Our rotation of troops or a rotation of people into these jobs are busted. And how we reward people. If our reward system is upside down, that we reward waste, which is basically what we do in Afghanistan, and we do in the United States too, domestically, we reward contracting officers by how much money they put on contract, not whether the contract's good or not. And as long as that is our mentality, you're not going to punish a guy for spending $400, $500 million on airplanes that don't fly. He actually probably got a promotion. And that is the whole system. We have to address the bigger issues here. We just see them on steroids when you're in a war zone like Afghanistan.
Before we go back to calls, John Sopko, you brought this poster. It says CGAR at the top. Big red letters, fraud hotline.
Yes.
What's the hotline about?
Well, the hotline is how we get information about cases. How we get information, so I hope you're showing it to the viewers because that is something we really appreciate. We see this in Afghanistan. We also see this in the United States where people will call our hotline. And our hotline we also answer in Dari and Pashtun. So that's how we get information and do our work.
Let's hear from Jeff in Laurel, Mississippi. Jeff, thank you for waiting. You're on with John Sopko.
Thank you. Before 9/11 happened, the United States was backing Afghan during the Charlie Wilson War time. They broke Russia. We armed them so much they broke Russia. And now we're in there fighting them. They're in there to break us. Another question you were speaking about, the opium trade. I've seen American soldiers walking through the opium fields by the poppies like a cow trail. So they don't mess with them. What's wrong with that? Why didn't they cut them out? Another thing is what happened to $8 million that come missing under the State Department under Hillary Clinton's watch? The $8 billion went boop. What happened to it? Thank you.
Mr. Sopko.
The $8 billion under Clinton's secretary, I really don't know what the caller is referring to. But the opium issue, part of it is we really haven't had a strategy, and we really have not had a willing government in Afghanistan until the recent government. So hopefully that will change. But you're absolutely correct. We just did not have a good strategy on how to deal with the opium problem, which is a difficult problem. I don't want to make light of that. We haven't had much successes in addressing drugs anywhere in the world. So to address the narcotics problem in the midst of a war is going to be difficult. But we really didn't have a strategy, and we didn't have a will to do anything about it.
On to Brooklyn, Fred. Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Sparko. I'm sorry to bother you. I have just one single question. I'm very familiar with Afghanistan. I have been around it. It's a dry country. There is very, very limited water available. So the farms are very close to the areas that they have water. Why we can't pay the farmers who cultivate opium so they don't cultivate it? and get the money in advance, because I'll cultivate something else close to the waterways. Why we can't do that?
Well, it's a little more difficult than that, and I think the caller says that there's a lot of areas that are arid. Actually, there are a lot of areas that are arid. But they do have some water, and they do use canals. We've helped them build canals. But it's not as easy as just creating a new crop. And we're actually going to have a major report coming out in the next few months looking at what lessons we've learned in addressing the problem. And again, because we don't have a strategy, we've had a hit and miss series of programs. We'd do security programs here, we'd do canals there, we would do crop substitution in some other district, and we never really stayed long enough to do it. So it's a little more complicated than that, and rather than give away our results on that lessons learned report, which we haven't finished yet, we're still running it by the agencies, or we're going to send it out to the agencies for comments. I'll wait till that report comes out.
Our guest is John Sopko, the Special Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction. He's a former state and federal prosecutor, also served as General Counsel and Chief Oversight Counsel for the House Select Committee on Homeland Security, served on the staffs of the House Committee on Energy and Commerce, the Select Committee on Homeland Security, and the Senate Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations, and as a partner at Aiken, Gump, Strauss, Hauer, and Feld. So you left the firm, what, 6 years ago now to take on this position. Does your position have a fixed length of time?
No, I serve at the pleasure of the president, and the agency itself is a temporary agency, so we go out of existence when the amount of reconstruction funds fall below, I believe, I think it's $250 million. Now, as you can see, we got $7 billion in the pipeline, so we may be around for a while. But I'm glad we're a temporary agency. We should be a temporary agency.
How many people work with you at the CGAR's office, and do you have enough resources?
We have about 190 people. I think our resources are adequate. We keep getting asked to do more things by Congress, and that's part of our job. So if there are more demands on it, we may need a few more dollars to do that. As long as we're there and we're spending this money and we're useful, then we may want to address that. But right now, I think we're satisfied with our resources.
We talked earlier about challenges to your work. There's another challenge outlined in a Politico story that moved recently. Defense bill leashes Afghanistan watchdog. The lead says that lawmakers are moving to rein in John Sopko, the Special Inspector General, who's angered many government officials with what they call bombastic claims about waste, fraud, and abuse. This was a provision tucked into the ENDA, the National Defense Authorization Act, which passed both houses of Congress recently. It requires inspectors general overseeing a key fund for Afghanistan to adhere to strict government auditing and inspection standards, all of their reports and other products. So for you, what is different, and in terms of what Congress is looking to do to your work, and how will it impact you?
Well, actually, that story is a bit misleading because we really follow the same standards that they're required by the statute, so there's really no change. We'd always followed the standards, and so I don't really see much difference. And we're glad that there's standards, and it's applied to all of the agents. We only hope the DOD IG, who's the number one covered by this, will also be able to meet those standards. So we've always followed as strict standards as we can.
Let's move on to Terry in Keene, New Hampshire now. Good morning, Terry. Thank you for waiting.
Yes, just curious. A couple of the former callers had mentioned the drug issue, and when you first started this segment, you mentioned that this war would never be won until we solve the drug problem there. Well, we can't even solve the drug problem in the United States. I'd like to know what you're doing over there, and how do you expect to solve a major issue like that when you really can't even get a handle on what's going on here in the United States. I mean, if that's what it's going to take, whether we should stay there or get out, if we can't win that war on drugs over there, then I think we should probably get out. Let's deal with our problems here in our country.
Okay. Any response?
Well, my response is, again, I don't run the programs to fight drugs. I just look at how they're carried out, and I agree with the caller. It's a very difficult task, and up to now we haven't had a strategy, and we really haven't had a commitment to do much in the drug issue. So I will leave it to the experts at aid and state and DOD on how to address that problem, and then we'll check and see how well it's being done.
On to Fulton, Maryland. Good morning. It's Hamilton. Good morning.
Hampton, H-A-M-P-T-O-N. I'm not the Secretary Treasurer.
Hampton, go ahead, please. Thank you.
John, I've seen you testify before Congress, and I share your frustration, but I don't share your gray hair. The question I want to ask is basically overall on the temporary agency. You said you have lessons learned. Is there a box there to lessons that have been applied? And the other question I want to ask is, you have SIGAR and SIGAR. That's the Special Inspector Generals for Iraq. I was wondering has there been a comparison between the two temporary agencies of what they took away from this and what's been applied? Because what piqued my interest is your comment saying, look, we're dealing with broken tools and nothing's being done as long as we have a disparate strategy, unworkable systems to be applied. So I would like to get your feedback on that, of what you feel that could be resolved. And finally, my last question is, when the temporary agency is closed down, will you be writing a book?
Well, I don't know about writing a book, but people say if I did, it would be a comedy. But going back to the SIGIR, which is, just to explain to the audience, that was the Special Inspector General for Iraq Reconstruction. That was set up. Stuart Bowen ran that for a number of years. They're now out of existence. So they did do a number of lessons learned reports. They did one major lessons learned report. What we've decided to do is do discrete ones. So the first one dealt with corruption, and what have we learned about that, with a number of recommendations. The second one dealt with the security sector assistance, which is basically how do you train, advise, and assist the Afghan police and the military, and that's being done. We're going to be looking at economic development. That's the next one, I believe, coming out, as well as the narcotics. I don't know of anybody who's actually compared the SIGIR with the SIGAR's findings. We've utilized the information that SIGIR identified in Iraq. We've also utilized information from the GAO, the DODIG, as well as the contracting commission that was set up. So we've kind of utilized those, and I think that's about as far as I can go. Again, I don't know if anybody's actually compared the two reports.
Let's hear from Daniel now. Daniel's in Tacoma Park, Maryland. Good morning.
Yeah, for my analysis, the only reason why we're there is because we're going to get a return on our investment. And so far, we've wasted like $1 to $2 trillion on both countries, Iraq and Afghanistan, and we're never going to get our money back. And I was actually like in high school when we were in Afghanistan, and I don't want to see us there another 20, 30 more years, and I don't want to see any more troops being dead and killed. And I guess your job is basically to analyze what the cost is to reconstruct that country on a troop's life, and I don't think it's worth it in the end. And I think that most Americans are against us being there, and I think that it's sad that we've had both Democrat and Republican presidents do nothing to leave those countries, and I don't think we'll leave those countries within the next two or three presidents.
Thank you, Daniel. Any thoughts?
Again, that's a policy issue. I appreciate the caller's concerns. And again, I don't do policy. I just present the facts on how we're carrying out those policies.
How many times have you been over to Afghanistan in these 6 years?
Oh, I don't have the exact number. I think close to 20. I try to go over there 3 to 4 times a year, and usually stay anywhere from a week to 2 weeks and try to get around.
What's it like to be there these days?
You don't get around as much as you used to because the security situation has deteriorated. You're basically staying in the U.S. Embassy and then getting out. I usually visit with the senior ministers, obviously visit with our troops, and I try to get out as much as possible because I've learned over the years, the further you get out from the center, the more likely you're going to get the truth. So we do that. I meet with the president and CEO of Afghanistan and try to work with them, try to talk to them about issues. As I alluded to before, the Afghans know who SIGAR is, maybe too well, because I actually have a target on my back over there because our reports are being used by the current government to do reforms. And so they are fighting the same corrupt influences that we are identifying. And you know, people may write bad articles about me here, but over there they tend to shoot you. And a number of investigators who are working for the Afghan anti-corruption police who have started to identify big fish have been assassinated. So it's a totally different environment over there that President Ghani and CEO Abdullah are facing. They're facing people who will kill you if you identify their corruption. So we try to work with them, we try to educate them because we got a lot of sources and we try to help them, but it's a dangerous place. That's all I can say.
From the report, the SIGAR report in October, ultimately it says the U.S. Designed a force that was not able to provide nationwide security, especially as that force faced a larger threat than anticipated after the drawdown of coalition military forces. Tell us more.
Well, we have the capability of training and advising and assisting. It's just as we got into this, we had never done something this huge before. Usually our security sector assistance is, as I believe I testified and you've cited it before, it's providing a new weapon system or IT system to a developed country, to a Korea, to a Japan, to whatever. Here you're dealing with a country with high illiteracy. It's been at war for 30-some years, very little infrastructure. The military and police were basically destroyed over the last 30 years. So it was very difficult, and we underestimated the difficulty. We also did not align our capabilities to their needs, and we're still got that problem. And so those are some of the big key issues. And we didn't really utilize our NATO allies as well as we could have.
Down to our last few calls for John Sopko. David is calling from Elk Grove, California. David, thank you for waiting. You're on the air.
Thank you. Good morning, C-SPAN. I wanted to comment first on the young lady who spoke very eloquently about the proliferation of the military-industrial complex and the need for America to keep weapons keep wars going so that weapons can be made so these companies can make hundreds of millions of dollars. But, Mr. Salko, I want to ask you a specific question. About a year ago or so, I read a couple of reports from Fox News and CNN about the U.S. Army Inspector General coming up with a waste, fraud, and abuse report that talked about $6.5 trillion being unaccountable from the U.S. Army. Do you know anything about that?
I'm sorry, I don't know which report you're referring to, and it could have been a DOD-IG report or something else. I don't know the details of it.
Keep going, David, if you'd like.
Army IG report, the U.S. Army.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't know that report.
I know nothing about it since I read those initial reports, and it seems to me $6.5 trillion would attract some attention.
Thanks, David.
I think so, it would, but I still don't know the details of that report. So.
Let's hear from Cindy now, St. Joseph, Minnesota. Welcome to the program, Cindy.
Hi. Listening to the names, your abbreviation, SIGAR, it sounds kind of close to what Leah Remini is talking on her show Scientology, which is a Sea Org. But what else was kind of strange, you're talking about the opium fields, and we heard during the Ron Paul 2 elections for president that many of the troops over there were saying the only reason we're there is to promote control of securing Bush's poppy fields. And the other thing we heard from these same soldiers was that we need to get out of there because we're basically training them to be a fighting force. And so and seeing how things are going now, I just think our troops need to come home. But I wanted you to clarify on that coincidental Sea Org name, Scientology. Is that anything to do with you guys?
No. I didn't come up with the name. Congress did. So I don't think it has anything to do with Scientology.
Leavenworth, Kansas. Paul on the air for John Sopko. Down to our last couple of minutes. Hi, Paul.
Yes, sir. Two quick questions for you. First is, as I remember, the U.S. military built a super-duper modern, state-of-the-art divisional headquarters in Helmand Province that the Afghans never occupied and didn't want. Whatever happened to it? And second, leading into that, how much of the problem is Americans coming over to Afghanistan for a year and they're trying to convince their Afghan counterparts, you need to have this project because I think it'll work for you? How much of it is Afghans who decide that they're going to milk their American for all it's worth for the year that you're there? And I'll take your answer offline. Thanks.
Oh, okay. Concerning that building, that was, I'm glad somebody pointed that out. That was one of the most outrageous things. We built this wonderful building, and it was supposed to be for the surge. By the time they started construction, the surge was over. The Marine Corps General, I got to give kudos to him and his superiors in the field. They said they didn't want the building. They wouldn't use the building. Please don't build it. It'll be a waste of money. And they were overruled by some general sitting back behind the lines who said, well, we have to build it because Congress gave us the money. And that goes back to accountability. We told DOD we should hold that general accountable for wasting, in this case, I think it was 30-some million or approximately. But the Pentagon said, no, that's not a problem. We don't mind that. Now, it's a different leadership. General Mattis is a totally different Secretary of Defense, and maybe we'd get a different response if we revealed that report or released that report today. But as far as we know, it's still not occupied because this is another issue. The Afghans can't sustain it. So they're not able to get the electrical and the rest of the systems up in place. So it's been a waste.
On to Douglas now. Culpeper, Virginia for John Sopko. Hi, Douglas.
Yes, good morning.
Good morning.
I've got a problem, with the war over there. We should use some of the wisdom that Sodom had in the Bible. These people, I think, have been turned over to a reprobate mind, and a lot of people in the United States is that way, too. They need to check the Bible and see what's going to happen in these countries. I think we are just wasting our time over there. If they want to continue the way they want to live, leave them alone, let them destroy themselves. That's all I've got to say. I'd like to know what your comment is on it. Thank you.
Something you want to respond to, sir?
I really don't do policy, so I can't really respond.
Albert, East Hartford, Connecticut. You're on the air now.
Yes. Hi, John.
Hey.
You're between a rock and a hard place, it seems, on this project. And I've been self-employed my whole life. And if I had to... it's like I don't even comprehend how anything could get done with so many people attached to each other, and including the working with a government that is totally dysfunctional, obviously, and outrageously crooked and so forth. Where do you see yourself going in this direction, John, and why? Is there any point to it at all?
Well, I appreciate your appreciation of my frustration sometime, but I'm eternally optimistic, basically because what's the alternative? I also firmly believe that strong oversight, and oversight being inherent to a mission, no matter what that mission is, will make the government better. Why I took this job is because I've been watching government screw-ups since I started with the government in 1977. It was state and local government, and then I've worked my way here. And you're not going to change it unless you give strong oversight and keep harping at it. And I'm a change agent. I'm trying to change how we do business and improve how we do business in Afghanistan, and what we've identified are the problems that are government-wide.
Remind us more about what's next for Seagar. You talked about the reports on corruption, on security, on narcotics, on development inside the country economically. What else do you want to know that you might not know now, or you want to know deeper?
I think looking at the planning, what's one of the lessons? What have we learned from the way we planned or didn't plan to go in there? I think that would be useful. And what we do is we talk to the ambassadors, we talk to the State Department, we talk to AID and DOD to get their ideas. What's useful to them? And we've also talked to Congress because of that. So we have a number of ideas still percolating.
Mohammed, Richmond Hill, New York, good morning.
Good morning, sir. How you doing? I have a question concerning the drug trafficking and drug trade. During the Vietnam War, we had military importing drugs and caskets and bring here to the United States. We had Noriega with that drug trafficking, and now we have Afghanistan. Problem is the Inspector General should stop making excuses concerning the drug war and just saying we are the largest importer of all drugs that you can think of, and by stopping a drug, you're going to be frozen all the medicine research in the hospital system, and look at it. Going on in the country. It's nothing more than drug investment. And nobody wants to say that we can't stop it. The fact is we can't stop it. You never will stop. Drugs run the world, and that's how it is. Thank you very much. So let me hear your comment.
Mr. Sapko.
Well, we don't have any evidence of that. And as a matter of fact, most of the opium coming to the United States does not come from Afghanistan. Most of it comes from Latin America or South America. So most of this drug goes to Europe. Quite a bit of it actually goes to Canada, China, Pakistan, Iran. But we don't really see much of it here. So I don't think there's a grand conspiracy here.
And Sarah now from Antrim, New Hampshire. Good morning.
Good morning. Yeah, I believe, money is power and power corrupts absolutely, and we need to follow the money. I have a question, and that is, how is it good for Afghanistan's reconstruction when there's a World Heritage Site there which represents Afghanistan history, and it's slated to be turned into a copper mine by a Chinese entity. And I would also recommend to viewers to look up a documentary called Shadow World on PBS.org, Independent Lens, and it shows the real corruption behind political power, and it's all the way to the top, and it's a corporate takeover of the world by the one percenters, and how they shuffle their money around, how they take bribes on these arms deals, and that money is shunted to offshore accounts, and that's really what's really going on with the world today. The corporations don't care about the people. They don't care about civilization. They care about money, and that is the bottom line. And money is power, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And this is the problem with the world and the country being run into the ground. My relatives had fought in Afghanistan and Iraq and have been pawns of the United States government in this thing. And we've seen it with Dick Cheney's Halliburton being the only inside contractor who bid in Iraq, which was a contrived war. And we're seeing it in Afghanistan. And I believe, along with the callers, that the drug trade, the arms deals, and all this is keeping us involved here. And it's a never-ending thing as long as the top wealthy corporations are making money. They control everything. It's a hostile corporate takeover of the United States government.
Sarah, thank you very much for calling. We're just about out of time. Final thoughts from our guest, Mr. Sapko.
Look, there's a lot of people who believe there's conspiracies out there. I don't. My office was created, and so you're looking at a head of a government agency, somebody who was appointed by a president, and there are 70 other inspectors general, and our job are to state facts and get the facts out there. So we're not part of that conspiracy. We understand there's a view that there's a grand conspiracy, but remember, we live in a country where they create independent inspectors general, and we fund them to try to bring out the truth and give you the facts and let you determine
what you want to do on the policy.
Again, the latest report out from the Special Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction. Here's a look at it. It's from October of this year. You can read it at www.sigar.mil. And our guest has been John Sopko, who is the Special Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction. Thanks a lot, as always, for your time.
It's a pleasure. I enjoyed it.
Thank you for joining us for this discussion of Afghanistan. Washington Journal airs every day, starting at 7 o'clock Eastern Time. So we'll see you back here tomorrow morning at 7. It's going to be a busy week here in Washington.